Hi, this is Editing Juliana here. I just wanted to come in at the beginning and let you guys know that this first episode was actually recorded several months ago. In that time, we have changed the name of our podcast, so it's now Read and Repeat Podcast, but you might hear the old name in here in the beginning. So just wanted to clarify that before we get into the episode. But otherwise, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you make it through the whole thing. All right, let's get into it.
You don't get to hear it.
No, I don't. I'm not starting the podcast, except I am going to start it now. So, okay, everyone, welcome to Nostalgic Novels, the podcast where my twin sister and I discuss mostly young adult novels from our past, and do some close readings, deep analysis, hot takes that you may not have thought of when you read them years and years ago. I'm Taylor.
I'm Juliana.
And today's book that we're going to be discussing that we have read in the past and just reread recently is Beautiful Creatures. So Juliana, would you care to share with a little bit about it?
Yes, I will talk a little bit about this book, introduce it. So Beautiful Creatures, whether you...
before you get started, spoiler alert. There will be spoilers. If you haven't read this book, you got to be okay with not having read the book and learning what we're doing.
I mean, it came out in like 2009 and there was a movie. I feel
you've
like
had some time.
And it's also one of those books, I feel like if you didn't read it at the time, you probably aren't interested in reading it now. I mean, I don't know, make your decision. If you haven't
Maybe you'll be interested in reading it after you hear us talk about it. That would be a cool outcome.
Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about it. So, Beautiful Creatures by Cami Garcia and Margaret Stohl, two authors for this book. So I'm gonna give a little plot synopsis, and we'll it won't go through the whole plot. We'll try to kind of keep on track throughout the conversation, and hopefully, if you haven't read it, you'll still be able to follow what's going on as much as you can. So. Let's see. I have a little synopsis I put together here. So Ethan Lawson, I hate Gatlin Waite, is a normal Southern 16-year-old who has been having dreams of a mysterious girl he's never met. When said girl turns out to be the new girl in town, Lena Duquesne, aka the niece of the infamous town shut-in Macon Ravenwood, Ethan falls head over heels for her, much to the dismay of literally every other living human in town. Lena's not just weird because she's related to Macon, or because she's sort of a goth and wears ratty old boots with dresses. She's also a caster, which is basically a witch. Ethan literally doesn't give... Can I say fuck? Ethan literally doesn't give a fuck about what anyone else thinks for the most part and starts dating her more or less immediately. But it turns out casters turn dark or light on their 16th birthday, and Lena is 15 and a half and convinced she's going dark. Ethan and Lena spend most of the book learning about their family histories and caster lore in an effort to prevent Lena from turning dark. Also, her mother is basically Lord Voldemort. And while all this is happening, the town just hates them because they don't like people who are different.
And we'll get into more about why that is briefly. But I guess for now, and thank you, Juliana, for that synopsis. For now, I think we want to just start talking about our memories and impressions and what we thought on this read through. But I'll start. So we probably read this book for the first time. I don't know if we read it right when it came out, but we probably were like 15, 16. Definitely in high school when this first came out, right?
Like
or
2000.
When we first read it.
I mean, 2009 it came out, which would have been, oh my God.
And I know I read it before the movie came out, too. I didn't read it because the movie was coming out. Like, I probably read it around the time it came out.
Yeah, it came out when we were, probably, middle school,
No.
Yeah, 2009. So, I don't know if we read it in
I
middle
forgot
school.
how old we are.
Yeah. Which is funny, because our birthday is coming up.
Yeah.
A week. But,
Okay, yeah, so we were younger than the characters in this book. That makes sense, because I did feel like that we weren't the age of the characters. But yeah, okay, so we were probably in middle school, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if we read it right away, but
That's what I'm saying. I don't know if I know I read it before the movie, but I don't know if I read it right away. I feel like I really enjoyed it when I read it. It wasn't my favorite book. I wasn't like, oh my God, this book, so great. But I enjoyed it. And one of the reasons I enjoyed it, I remember, was because of the like setting in the South. Because I don't feel like I was a huge Civil War buff when I was younger. I don't know why. We're from the North. We're from New York. So, didn't have a ton of personal history connected to anything remotely related to the Civil War. But I was really into it. And so this is one of the only young adult fantasy novels that I read that was set in the South. So I remember being interested in that perspective and, all of the stuff. And we're going to get into that in a bit. But I definitely enjoyed it. What did you think when you first read it?
Yeah, so I remember, so like I definitely read it. I definitely read more than one book in the series, but I don't think I had quite as positive of a or like I remember being frustrated by it. I remember like there were certain elements that I liked. Like I remembered I liked the evil cousin. I didn't remember her name before we read the book, and I remembered I liked Link, the best friend. Of Ethan. I remember I liked those two characters, and that's about it. Like I wasn't into the main guy. I didn't even remember his name, I don't think, at first.
I actually forgot that it was a guy. When we went to reread it, I like, or no, not I forgot it was a guy. When I was starting, because I've read so few books, I guess, with guy protagonists. When I started reading it, I just assumed it was a girl. And then, I mean, very quickly realized it wasn't, but I remember like just assuming when I read it, it was a guy. So then I was like, oh, this is from the perspective of a guy. This is cool.
Yeah. It is kind of odd for, in terms of like the kind of like novel it is. It's like very much like a young adult romance fantasy. So you don't see a lot of like guy, like main character, like main protagonist, like point of view characters, which I did think was kind of interesting, for better or worse. But I remember, I remember just like kind of being very confused overall by the plot and like the magic system, and it's just like that made it kind of unenjoyable to read for me. So like there were just like the very small elements that I liked, like the side characters. Yeah. And I remember being like somewhat put off by like the way that the Civil War was kind of such a big part of the book, and like the Confederacy and like the history of the South, even though I don't know if I really had the full awareness to know exactly what about it bothered me at the time. I mean, of course there's a simplistic version of like, oh, North good, South bad, which is, not necessarily the most nuanced way to look at history. But a lot of times, like, kind of the impression I think a lot of maybe kids get, depending on what kind of education they get, where they grow up, all that. But I mean, we'll get into like a bit more about like how that stuff is kind of incorporated, I think.
I also liked the I kind of liked I remember liking the fact that I didn't really understand the magic, and that it was kind of like a mystery, like them finding out their family and about their family and finding out about the magic. I did like that when I first read it.
Interesting.
I don't remember it being groundbreaking.
Yeah, definitely not.
It was just a fun, quick read,
But yeah, I mean, we'll talk about like interesting what you brought up, like liking that it was kind of a mystery the whole way through of how certain things worked. We'll talk about how they did that and like my feelings on it the second time around, because I want to get into that. I have a lot of thoughts on the magic system.
Yeah, I have more thoughts now than I did when I read it.
Just in general, I have more thoughts now.
Yeah. True, in general. Do you want to talk about what you thought of it on this read through, like generally?
So on this read through, I mean, generally, oh god, well, it's hard to say, because I feel like this read through, I read it with such a different mindset. Like when I was younger, I was just reading it for fun. I wanted to read a book I don't remember exactly like what first got me into it. But I was just reading for fun. This time around, I was reading with more obviously like adult eye, I guess, a more critical eye, but at the same time also like more of a like I've got more life behind me now. And my mind is, I would say, more open in some ways and more aware in others. And so it was a much more nuanced reading experience for me, I think. Than back then. I was more of like like I enjoyed that or I didn't enjoy that kind of thing. Like I might still read a book if I didn't enjoy it for the most part because I was still into the parts that I didn't I was still into certain parts of it, but like overall I'd be like, I didn't like that. And I don't really feel like I can say, oh, I I liked it or I didn't, but I know that there were still things that bothered me, and then there were also some things that I kind of maybe didn't love but appreciated more or differently than I would have back then.
Yeah.
And then of course there were some things that I just was like, I loved it then, I love it now. Very few I would say in this book, but
I would say pretty much the same in terms of like this was much more nuanced. I had way more analysis and I went into it with the thought of analyzing it. And I definitely do not feel the same way I did when I first read it. There for me personally, more bad than good, but I still really enjoyed the read through. I don't know if I'm gonna read it again ever. Um, maybe just for nostalgia purposes in another like 10 to 15 years. But I did enjoy this read through because of the analysis I was putting in. Otherwise, if I were just reading it now as an adult, I would have noticed all of these things that I didn't when I was younger and didn't like when I noticed them, and had a much less enjoyable time.
You know what's really funny is like I think we both ended up at the same conclusion, but we came from different directions.
We definitely did. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, let's get into the meat of it.
Yeah, we're gonna kind of break this down by topic, but we're also gonna try to go in order of like the story. So we'll see how that goes. It might be really confusing, but we're just gonna try to have fun with it.
Yeah.
So we decided to start with a conversation about the setting because it's very important. As we mentioned, it's set in the South in a town called Gatlin. Do you want to start with like your thoughts, or you want me to start? Oh, Gatlin, South Carolina?
Oh, yes, Gatlin, South Carolina. And so I'm actually happy for you to start because I have much more distinct thoughts about our other topics, and this is a little bit more nebulous, so maybe your take will help me solidify what I'm thinking.
Okay, well, we can kind of start. I'm gonna like read the first line of the book.
Yeah, okay, do it.
That's literally like, okay, so the first line of the book starts with the chapter labeled Before, entitled The Middle of Nowhere. And we start out with Ethan's narrations, first person, and Ethan's perspective. And this is the first line. There were only two kinds of people in our town. The stupid and the stuck, my father had affectionately classified our neighbors. The ones who are bound to stay or too dumb to go. Everyone else finds a way out. There was no question which one he was, but I never had the courage to ask why. So actually, I feel like that's kind of a pretty strong start to a novel. I was actually kind of like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I was pleasantly surprised when I like opened this, and I was like, wait, that's kind of a good like way to set this. Like,
yeah, I mean, we know exactly where Ethan stands. There's some intrigue with his dad's situation and what's going on there and why they're there, and it's
and that's something too we can get into maybe a bit later, but I don't think we really get a definitive answer onto like why
his dad is stuck, they're stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we can infer that there might be some stuff brewing with that, but like I don't think there's a point when they actually talk about it, but we'll get there. Yeah. So basically this kind of sets Ethan up as a character who's not super not a big fan. I mean, I did label him Ethan Lawson, I hate Gatlin, wait.
And that is one of the truest or strongest motifs throughout the book, or theme, I don't know. I'm not sure which one you'd call that, but motif, I think, is that Ethan hates Gatlin. And he hates the people in it.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody.
It's definitely so, and this is the thing, okay, because we said before, we're not from the South, and I wouldn't say that we don't live in we didn't grow up in like a small town that we identified with at all, really, and I'm not saying where we grew up was the the wokest of the woke. It's definitely not, but it's also like it's just not the same. It's more of a suburban kind of situation. So we don't have like a I don't know if we're there's I'm sure there's a perspective that someone could bring to this who actually maybe grew up in a southern town that maybe has this kind of dogma that Gatlin seems to, which is very much just like a very small town. It's set up to just like not be welcoming to outsiders, basically. To be very caught up in the Civil War history, the genealogy of the families. You get
the Daughters of the American Revolution is a huge
that
point.
And
I
Ethan,
also want to. Sorry.
Well, and Ethan's basically it's kind of set up with the dichotomy of like, oh, Ethan has professor parents or had professor parents, and
they're educated, they're okay.
Yeah,
the rest of the town is not educated, and they're stupid and evil.
Bigoted, and
And I think it's important to note here that the authors are, one of them is from DC, but she currently lives in Los Angeles. The other was born in Pasadena and currently lives in Los Angeles. So I don't know how much experience with southern towns and this kind of culture these two authors have. I mean, one of them did live in DC, which you can consider the South, but it's also a bigger city. It's just an interesting thing to point out. We are not experts on Southern living and Southern culture, but I'm skeptical that these authors are as well. So kind of have to keep that in mind.
And I'd rather like not get too much into like what the authors were trying to or not trying to do, because at the end of the day, you can't live in someone else's mind. But we're just going to take what's on the page and kind of
right. My point is mostly to emphasize that this is fiction, regardless of whether or not people are like this or aren't like this. It's fiction.
But coming from my perspective, reading about Gatlin, like, so throughout the book, basically one of the main through lines is like, and one thing that should be pretty obvious here, which we should mention, is at least, unless I missed something here, we are to assume that the majority of the characters in this book and in this town are white. This is a very white book. 2009 popular young adult fiction, white. And so that's just something that it's there. It is. I mean, that's the perspective, and it's very obvious in the sense that the book kind of seems to dance around some of the finer points of why a southern town that is so insular, that's very obsessed with their genealogy and history, like what that actually means in terms of like who they don't like and who they're bigoted towards. In general. And case in point, there's a lot of talk about the Civil War throughout the book in terms of Ethan had ancestors who fought in it. I mean, all the characters did. They in high school they're participating in at the end of the book. Although they don't actually participate in it in the book, but they're supposed to. They're supposed to participate in a reenactment of a battle. I'm assuming a fictional battle of Gatlin, actually, and I would have liked to.
I think Gatlin is a made-up town, so I don't think it's real.
Okay, so they're supposed to be like participating in that reenactment, and like they're dressing up as like their Confederate ancestors and things like that. Like it's a
and there's a lot of Confederate pride. Which is noted as moderately distasteful, but there's not a discussion of racism or potential racism. There's barely a discussion of race at all. Yeah, there's one mention of slavery in a book that features a ton of history about a war about slavery. And actually, like, so much so that it kind of is dubious in the book as to what people think the war was fought over.
Right, and that's like, again, something that like maybe is a thing in like in some places where, you know, again, it's you know, but I don't want to paint anywhere with a broad brush or like this is fiction, but at the same time, you know, I'm sure there are people in places who do not, you know, place emphasis on the slavery aspect of which was an aspect, which was like the whole thing.
And even Ethan, who's, you know, high and mighty above all these people, which we'll definitely talk more about. At one point he says, you know, he would never fight a war, fight a losing war on the wrong side. And I thought it was interesting that it was, I mean, first of all, it's very vague. You know, obviously, knowing history, we know the South lost and the North won. But I found it, and maybe this is just getting too nitpicky about language and like what it means, but I probably would have started fight the war on the wrong side versus fight a losing war on the wrong side, because I feel like it kind of puts the emphasis on like, yeah, they were losing and they were on the wrong side. Like he was fighting a losing war. I don't know.
There are a few places in the novel where, you know, Ethan might be talking to some of his family members who, like the sisters who are his great aunts, I think, who all live together and they're, you know, very, you know, entrenched in their history, yes, with the rest of the town, they're very old. And, you know, like
they call it the war of northern aggression.
And he'll make like internal, like snarky comments about, you know, some of their takes on history, or in history class, their teacher, Mr. Lee, is definitely like, you know, another person who, like Ethan will make comments like about his beliefs about the war. And he's always, you know, Ethan is very just not with the rest of the town in terms of like how he views their history. And that's made very, 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 very clear and repeatedly clear throughout the whole book. But yeah, it just doesn't.
And yet,
it kind of skates around. It just skates around. You know, I would say would be the biggest issues of like, you know, it kind of painted. I don't even know if it does this intentionally, because here's the thing. You know, this is a young adult novel about like magic, and I don't know
and young adult romance. It's not about deep things.
Yeah. I don't know if they were ready to address topics that are that like as heavy as that. Not saying not to say that they shouldn't or should or shouldn't, but just saying that that's.
I mean, it makes for a sort of uncomfortable read a little bit,
which is what makes it so interesting to me, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, even Ethan, who, again, as Juliana said, strongly does not side with his town folk. But like he even describes it as a war in which they were spilling blood over cotton, which is still skirting around the true issues at the heart of the Civil War. And so it's you read that and it's, you know, the backdrop is so stark and yet nebulous and definitely gray.
Yes.
You get my meaning. my pun there, because Confederate soldiers wore gray. It's a gray area, you know. Anyway.
Yeah. Another thing too, though. So it's very. I was thinking about this, because you know we did. I also wonder had the book gone in on that. Like there are historical fiction books that go into more detail about that kind of thing, that address racism. Like there are definitely books in that in that age range that, you know, I mean, like some I think we read from school, like, you know, that go into that. But I wonder what the genre it is, if it even would have, like, if it might have had trouble getting it published if it even went into that. Not saying that that's why they didn't.
No,
but, you know,
I think that's true. I think
now it would actually be like someone could write this novel and leave all that out, but like I don't think it would have the same reception that it did back in 2009. I feel like things have changed a lot since then in terms of like what people are looking for in their fiction. I mean, could just be, you know, me getting older, but I get the sense that there's a lot more call for, even as there's still censorship going on and people banning books that mention things like this, like slavery, like racism, like obviously like anything else that's considered contentious for, reasons. I still think the broader perspective is more interested in telling these more nuanced stories, even in young adult fiction.
And I think it would have benefited a lot from that, to have that deeper, like it would have made all of the points that he's making stronger. It would have been a more nuanced discussion. And Ethan even has an ancestor named Ethan, Ethan Waite, who is a deserter from the Civil War. And like Ethan's proud of him for being a deserter from the Confederate Army. But then when we see the brief discussion that we see in a flashback of Ethan's decision to leave the army, it was super nebulous. It was super non-committal about why he wanted to leave,
Right. And that's the thing, is like, that might be the case, in reality. And there's a nuanced, conversation to be had about about all of U.S. history too. It's one of those things where it's like, even as we're saying, oh, they didn't talk about the real heart of the issue. They're not talking about slavery. Like, it's not even about like, oh yes, Confederate bad, South bad, but bad because slavery. It's also like, because it's kind of like, oh, Gatlin bad, but there's not really like nuance in terms of like, obviously, the Union, the Northerners, whatever. It's not like, there were no slave owners over there. It's not like it wasn't a battle between good and bad. It was a lot more nuanced than that. It was, obviously like surrounding an issue of evil, but it takes away a lot to kind of turn it into, oh, one side good, one side bad, because there's a lot of complicated stuff going on that historically it might better serve us to learn from that by having more nuanced discussions that really aren't breaking things down into good and bad.
And I think this is kind of just occurring to me now. It's actually not in any of my notes, but I think part of the reason why it might have been oversimplified and kind of skirted around is because, it's not the focal point of the book, and this is jumping to magic, which we're going to talk about later, but the magic system is basically good, bad. They even say like the bad and the good are still fighting their own civil war. So it's kind of like, Ethan is putting himself, there's the bad people in town and the good people are basically him and the people he associates with. And then in Lena's Castor family, there's literally good and bad, and they don't have a choice. So that's an interesting connection that we could talk more about. But I am interested in talking more about Ethan. I think Gatlin is going to come.
Yeah. And with this, let's kind of get more into the plot too, because we kind of
because right now we're just talking about general themes of non-slavery and non-Civil War. Almost.
Yeah. So I know you have a lot to say about Ethan. Can I just give a kind of more of an introduction to his character?
Yeah, go for it. Before I start.
Here's Ethan's situation. So we obviously established that he doesn't like, the town that he lives in. To get more into it, he feels very stuck. He feels like he's surrounded by people who just, aren't on the same level as him in some ways. And here's the thing is, like, aside from all the things that we talked about where we didn't see the nuance and kind of important discussions with that, the general feeling of feeling like you're stuck in the place where you're at, that's relatable. Especially for, I'd say, teenagers, but it can happen at any point in life where you could feel like you're stuck in a certain place. And I think that starting off with that, for me, having recently felt stuck in a very different way.
Very different way.
Very different way. But the feeling is there. And I think that's part of why I had a bit of a different experience this time, is I think there were some feelings that I could convey onto the character situations that
you could relate to a little bit more.
Same way I could, so I could kind of put that feeling into it. But yeah, so he's feeling stuck in this town. more than that, he also, just lost his mom. I think it's like 5 months ago from the start of the book. His mom was killed in a car crash. Or was it a car crash? We don't actually know. Actually, I don't think we ever confirmed. But
No.
there's something weird going on there. But yeah, so he's just lost his mom. His dad is, honestly, it was really upsetting reading about his dad.
Yeah.
Is not handling it well. He's, grieving, but kind of, it's kind of losing his mind throughout the book. And so the beginning of it, we kind of just get a glimpse of, Ethan says, that his dad doesn't really come out of his study. He doesn't really talk to him when he does come out of the study. And so the only other person in his life that's really taking care of him right now is Emma, who is kind of like, is she like a nanny? Like
she's like a caretaker, housekeeper kind of figure. It's unclear exactly what her role is, but she's been with the family for a while. Basically, it seems since Ethan can remember, I think. And so once his parents definitely raised him. Emma didn't raise him, but once his mom passed, Emma became the mother figure.
Yeah. So Ethan kind of going through a lot. And on top of all that, he's having these dreams, like we mentioned in the synopsis, about a girl he doesn't know, and he's like, I know everyone in Gatlin, I don't know this girl. And he's just like, I'm losing my mind, kind of. And so the thing I'll say I'll say my little thing here just to wrap up about what my summary of Ethan is that I was kind of feeling him in the beginning, in terms of I was like I could project a bit of the feelings of being stuck, feelings of loss, things like that into the character, and really feeling for him and being like, oh, this is a 16-year-old boy, whereas like maybe when I was 13, I was like not feeling the nuance of those emotions as much.
Sure.
I will say though, however, through a lot of the book, particularly through the middle, I did feel like, and this might come down to the writing, it was lacking some emotionality that I think really would have benefited the story more for me, especially given where Ethan is in life and like what's going on in his life. I just feel like we weren't getting a lot of the emotionality that was I kind of ended up having to project onto the story. That made me not enjoy his point of view for good portions of the book. But I'll get into the ones that I did like later, but I know, Taylor, you have a lot to say.
Yeah, and actually a lot of what I have to say does have to do with other characters. So our next section does talk about the other characters, but I'm going to probably pull some of them into this as well. But general impressions, I generally agree with you in the beginning of the book. He's a little bit more bearable for me. Like he's super judgmental, super opinionated, but he's also going through a rough time, and you can see that. And like you said, he's a kid. As the book goes on, I have less and less sympathy for him, and it's because of how he interacts with the other characters, or even just talks about them in his head. I don't think he's a good friend to his best friend. He's very self-absorbed. I don't think he's a good boyfriend to his girlfriend Lena, and I want to talk about the two of them together. And I think overall he's very entitled. Like it is from his perspective, but the whole thing is the Ethan show. No matter what the conflict is, he's pretty much concerned for people as an extension of himself and what it means for him, which I found distasteful. But talking a little bit more specifically, I want to talk about Ethan and Lena, because Lena is that girl from his dreams. The funny thing was whenever she first showed up, for some reason he thought that she was the girl from his dreams, and I thought that was really interesting, because if I was having dreams that involved recurring dreams that involved a girl, and then someone showed up to my school and was a new kid in school, the first thought that I would have was not that she was the girl from my dreams. But I think that gives a snapshot of how Ethan's self is centered around himself, or Ethan is centered around himself. But so he, is really attracted to Lena mostly because of what it meant for his dreams and like the mysteriousness of it. And it kind of starts, he already sees the people around him as lesser, but now he's critical of their interactions. He starts to see how he contributes to that system that he hates and how he's basically one of them as he watches Lena get like basically bullied. She's bullied, when she arrives because she's super different. All of the girls hate her. The guys hate her because they like the girls, I think. And that's basically their own reason. Oh, and they hate her because she's Macon Ravenwood's niece. He's the town shut-in. Everyone's afraid of him. They don't like him. So therefore, Lena is an extension of Macon. None of the kids like her either. Yeah. But then Ethan sorry, I'm just going to finish this thought and then, okay. But Ethan starts to see that he, if this was anyone else or in another situation, he would have just gone along with it. He might not have done the mean things, but he was kind of contributing to it. And because Lena was important to him, he decided, okay, I'm going to break the mold. And he starts eschewing all of the things that he's known for his whole life and all of the friends that he's had and the basketball team that he's so good on, like mysteriously good on. We could talk about that too. But anyway, just because Lena is important to him, not because he thinks that it's a nice thing to do, is my take on that. I have much more to say, but I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah. So, what you said about him realizing how he contributes to that system, I had a quote highlighted for that, and a note with it. But yeah. So he said something about this is when it's early on, and he's only maybe spoken to her a couple times, maybe once, I don't remember. But he says that something about her is bothering him, aside from the fact that she's like pretty and wears the wrong clothes and this and all that. He says, it was that she made me realize how much I was just like the rest of them, even if I wanted to pretend I wasn't. And then my note was, aha, there it is. We stand a self-aware king.
Yeah. So I really liked that part, and I wish that they had explored it more.
Yeah. No, I do too. Because it's true. You get the sense, even though, of course, if you're bringing issues of like, say, racism or things like that into the story, like it's understandable if he's like really like, I can't stand these people. But if a lot of the time he's saying things like, oh, they're stupid, oh, they're this, that, all those kinds of things. And so it just really just makes him come across as judgmental rather than like, someone who's trying to be a better person.
And one of the issues that he has is that they're judgmental of other people and they hate other people. And meanwhile, he's there being super judgmental. And I can talk for so long about Ethan's judgmentalness, and we will. But I want to continue on the thread of Ethan and Lena because I hate them together. Mostly because he will not take no for an answer. There's no sex in this book. Well, there is mention of sex and what could happen if they had it.
Oh my God.
Which, frankly, that felt way out of place in the context of the rest of this book, which is pretty sexless. Like they hold hands and they kiss, they make out a couple times.
Except for when Ridley's on the scene, but we'll talk about her.
Yeah, we can talk more about Ridley. But so for the most part, Ina, that's their couple name, Ina. For the most part, Ethan and Lena don't have a very sexual relationship, and most of their relationship is spent figuring out who they are, independent of one another, truly. And so that's the basis for the relationship, is weird things are happening to them, and they're drawn to each other because of it. And Ethan, like I said, will not take no for an answer. There's a lot of things going on that Lena is afraid of because she's the one who's powerful. Like she doesn't understand the extent of her powers. People in her family are keeping things from her, and she wants to proceed with caution. And pretty much at every point where Lena says, no, don't say something. No, don't ask that. No, I don't want to. Ethan will literally ignore it. And this happens so frequently in the book. I mean, I I'm trying to find in my notes a part, like one of the things I wrote down.
You know what's really funny is that I think you and I read those scenes a bit differently, like from a bit of a different perspective. Because I get what you're saying. I see that, and it totally did happen a lot. And there were times when I was like, Ethan, like, chill, dude. But I think that was part of my annoyance when I originally read it, was like just one of those things of like, ugh, like he's so annoying, he's so obsessed with her, blah 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 blah, like not being into their romance. This time around when I read it, I think I was just so freaking pissed off at the adults for not being honest and for being like shady, that I was just like, yeah, Ethan, you asked them that question. They deserve to be questioned because no one's telling you anything.
That's fair, and that is valid. I agree with that, but I was still mad because it felt like it was all directed at Lena and going against what Lena wanted to do. Yeah. It wasn't just that he was persistent. It was literally, there was a quote, and I found it. Quote, she didn't want to talk about it, but I didn't care.
Yeah.
That's him questioning his girlfriend about things that she's not even sure about. And she doesn't want to talk about it because it's making her upset. And she's just trying. All Lena wants is to be a normal kid. And one of the ways that she wants to do it is to have a normal boyfriend relationship with Ethan. And Ethan will not let her have that for a second.
That's where Lena and Ethan are very interesting as a couple, because he likes Lena because she's not normal, but she likes Ethan because he is normal. Or as normaler than her.
Yeah.
And we'll also talk about like normal, like what does that even mean? I mean, like if she grew up with casters, why does she feel like she's not normal? I mean, they talked about a bit about it when they talk about how she and her cousin started going to school with all the mortals, and you know, were considered different and were bullied because of it, because they didn't have all the references that all the mortal kids did, and the right clothes and all that. Like, so you know, I'm assuming it comes from that experience. But you know, there was this sense of like Lena being an outsider in her own family that I just feel like wasn't explored.
Yeah,
enough for me to believe it.
I agree. I actually, and this is talking about Lena, but one of the things I was thinking of is I would have loved this from Lena's perspective, to kind of understand understand that part of it, how she's feeling. You know, she's feeling ostracized in her family, she's feeling ostracized in life, but then we also do see her through Ethan's eyes. We do see her grow throughout the course of the book. All of a sudden, you know, she goes from not being able to control her powers, and it just happens when she's really emotional, and then she's able, you know, by the time she's ready to, or about to turn 16, she's got crazy control, and she's more confident, and she's kind of less nervous than when Ethan was always going against her wishes. And I would have loved to see that self-actualization and understand what was going on in her. And then I feel like it was bad boyfriend Ethan didn't even see it happen. All of a sudden was just like, oh no, wow, Lena's, she knows what she's doing now. And I was like, but how? Tell me how. I want to know more about this. Ethan, ask her. Like,
that's the thing, is there was a lot of this, like, Ethan was asking questions a lot and was not getting answers, sure. But there were also times when he didn't ask questions, and I was like, someone would have asked a question about that.
Right.
I wish I had a solid example off the top of my head, because I did not organize my notes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've had.
But I like, there were times when I think one example is when so as they get to know each other and they kind of start dating, but it's like they're basically dating, but they're not like saying it, you know, that kind of high school thing. And they then he finally like gets to meet her family and learn more about the powers, and we'll get into the powers, but we keep saying we'll get into
Yeah, I know. We're gonna get into everything.
We're gonna get into everything. We've barely scratched the surface. This is gonna be so long. They like when he meets like the rest of her family, like her uncle Macon, her aunt Dell, her cousin Reese, her cousin Larkin. I think there's another uncle, but I forget his name.
Yeah, it's not important.
She goes through each of their powers and what they're called and what they do, but then she gets to Macon, and he asks her, "Oh, what's Macon's powers?" And she just says, "Oh, Uncle Macon is just Macon. He would do anything to protect me." And I'm like,
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Like, if I were Ethan, I would have been like, but what are his powers, though? Like,
yeah.
Or I would have had a thought like, oh, is he mortal or does he not have powers? Like,
right.
But there's no questioning of that.
And I kind of got the sense that Lena didn't know because of when she found out what his powers were. I feel like she was surprised. But Ethan doesn't know that.
Yeah. But there was another part where I thought it said that she did know. And that's the thing, is that there were some, this is just like a mechanics thing in terms of, there were some moments when characters behaved a certain way just because it was maybe more plot convenient, or just like not giving something away, as opposed to how they would have actually behaved. And because like a character like Ethan, like he asks a lot of questions, he wants to know all the things. It's very glaring when he doesn't ask a question. Right. You're like, wait, you're just gonna accept that and move on?
Yeah.
And I think it was in service of keeping this mystery going of, what casters really are.
Yeah, and revealing the information piece by piece.
But for me, that just did not work for the story, because...
Yeah, I think sometimes that was a little bit frustrating, especially when it was character driven and the characters weren't acting right. It's one thing for it to be a convenient scenario that keeps them from getting information, like, okay, fine, but...
And I also just felt like, Lena's grown up in this caster society. It feels like she should know.
Right, why doesn't...
I think she knows their life.
How did her family keep so much from her?
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting threads there that could have been explored.
Yeah.
Back to Ethan. I'm trying to find one of my notes, but I think it basically boiled down to that. He was basically Ethan, not like other girls. Wait, like that was what it was to me. Where he was like,
not
because
girls, not like other Southern.
He reads. He is good at basketball. He's not racist, but he doesn't say that. But I think that's the implication. Unclear, but he's not like the other Southerners. And I don't know. There's just some like interesting things that he says that really just makes it seem like he thinks and we already covered this, but I'm just going to throw out a few interesting tidbits, like where he and Lena are talking about each other, about themselves, and she's embarrassed because of a scenario that happened at school. One of the important things that I think we didn't say: Ethan and Lena can read each other's minds. Not necessarily all the time, but they do gain greater control over it. Yeah. I don't know why this is exactly, and it's not totally explained in the book unless I just completely missed it. But so they can read each other's minds, and they discover this, and this is after or around the time where Lena's got a really bad day at school, and her powers manifest because she's upset because she's being bullied, and glass breaks, and people are up in arms. And so they're having this conversation because Ethan went to find her because she left school, and now they're talking about each other, and he's trying to make her feel better, and he says, you know what's stupid? I have books under my bed ... and I read them, period, because I want to. And I had to stop reading at that point because I was like, Ethan, that doesn't make you special. I don't understand, like, why that's weird, why that's different. It sounds like you just want to brag about reading.
I mean, then again, look, there are places that ban books, and maybe Gatlin is one of them.
It probably would be. I actually feel like that could have been
I might have mentioned that
you bring up a good point. You bring up a good point. But I'm still gonna I'm going to use another example. I'm going to press this point a little bit more, where there's another part in the book where, so Link's mom, his best friend's mom, is actually being possessed by Lena's mom, who's the absolute worst dark caster ever. And there's one point where Lena's mom, as Mrs. Lincoln, shows up at Ethan's house with a tray of brownies and tries to get invited in, which
honestly, genuinely creepy scene.
It was. I actually do feel like that was written pretty well in terms of how creepy it was. I definitely agree. It was creepy. And for some reason has to be invited in, or like it's implied that she can't come in because he didn't invite her, which doesn't make sense to me because this is the most powerful caster ever and she's not a vampire. but that's
we're assuming it's because Emma put charms, because Emma
that's right,
practices magic. That's
the housekeeper / caretaker practices magic and voodoo, and probably you're right. Yes. Okay. But the point I want to make is Ethan doesn't invite her in. And this is a big deal for Ethan because he grew up at Link's house, or, he and Link grew up together. He would have, Link's mom has baked Ethan brownies a bunch of times. And so it's a big deal for him to have this bad feeling. And at this point, Link's mom has a total vendetta against Lena. So Ethan hates her because, for rightly so. This is one of those cases where I'm like, yeah, I would absolutely. She is the worst of the worst. Makes sense. But he stands his ground, doesn't invite her in. Great. He describes it later on in the book as he took on Mrs. Lincoln, and like a list of other things that he did. I should have written down the whole list, but in a list of other things that he did that he wouldn't have done, and he was like, it was so impressive. And I was kind of like, you didn't take on Mrs. Lincoln. You didn't know that she was possessed. You didn't invite her into your house at 10 p.m. It was 10 o'clock when she showed up. And so I just the way he described that, it's just like, Ethan just thinks all of the things that he does are so special and different, and like,
yes, I will say, I'm just playing devil's advocate through this whole thing because this was probably me, like, on my first read through.
Yeah, we swapped on this, I think. Because I wasn't Ethan positive when I first read it, but I was definitely Ethan ambivalent when I first read it.
And I'm more Ethan ambivalent now, with some positivity thrown in there.
I'm Ethan negative.
But there were definitely moments that he doesn't shine through, and some of it I think comes down to writing and the tendency authors have to take their character's side when they could maybe step back and be more of a neutral writer and let the character play out how they play out, and
right.
not be so good bad.
I think at this point I want to say to our readers that you majored in writing seminars at Johns Hopkins. I can't believe I almost just said John Hopkins. That
you also said our readers, so I
oh. That's what you're saying. Okay, at this point,
they are readers.
Yeah, I mean, but let's start that over. At this point, I want to call attention to our listeners that Juliana majored in writing seminars at Johns Hopkins, and writing seminars is the creative writing major. And she also majored in film. I also majored in film, but also with international studies. So I don't exactly have the analysis street cred that Juliana does, and so that's why she can talk a little bit more eloquently about this.
Don't expect too much. Okay.
I just wanted to shout it out. Continue.
But yeah, no. So I mean, when I was saying about Ethan, like, saying that, like, he took on Mrs. Lincoln and whatnot, to play devil's advocate, I think especially when you're a teenager, but even when you're an adult, sometimes it is the smallest things that are the hardest to do. And I'm not saying that was necessarily well conveyed in the story, but I would say, again, this is also me, like, having, like, some things that I can kind of, like, there are definitely have been moments, especially recently, where I think there are certain decisions that I've made about my life that might have seemed easy to someone else who's not me, but were very difficult to me. Now, not at all this. Not at all. I'm not going to go into my whole personal life, but not at all similar to what's going on in the book. But just moments where I had to step back and be like, wow, that was so difficult for me to do. But, like, someone else looking at my situation who has a different mindset, has a different life, different past, different, just everyone's, we have as many perspectives in this world as there are people.
Yeah.
Probably might have been nothing to them to make, like, a certain decision about this, about that.
And you're right. I did kind of touch upon that too. That definitely does come into play because of what Mrs. Lincoln means to him in terms of being. He's not a mom that I think he particularly felt connected to, because she's always been a little bit strict and, daughters of the American Revolution.
Yeah, all that.
Into and whatever. But she was a significant figure from his past life, which I feel was different. So you make a good point. I have one more thing to say about Ethan before we dive a little bit more into the other characters, and it does involve other characters. And this is the final thing I'll say against Ethan specifically, maybe, probably. But let's just talk. So this is, again, first person. So we're hearing all of the descriptions of people through Ethan's mind. And so he's describing like the basketball team that he's on, and it's basically just stereotypical dudes, they're basically only care about basketball. They're anti the new girl basically because that's the thing to do. They don't have a ton of thoughts.
They don't have any person.
They don't have any, yeah, exactly. So, okay, great. How he describes the girls, on the other hand, is much more intense, and I hate it. And I am not saying these girls are definitely not supposed to be good characters, but okay, so there's like a clique basically, and it's made up of Savannah Snow and two girls with E names. I don't remember, Emily and something else. I think there was another E name in that clique because there were four of them, and then. What?
Charlotte was one.
No, Charlotte. I'm getting to Charlotte.
Okay.
Charlotte is the one. So Savannah Snow is like the leader of this clique and also is the most popular girl at school despite being a sophomore. I don't know how, honestly, it wasn't really up on popularity in our high school, but I do feel like it was pretty segregated by grades. And even though you knew people in every grade, I wouldn't single out anyone in any grade as being the most popular girl in school. Like, for example, Savannah Snow wins Snow Queen at the dance that they have. Anyway, so she's really mean. She's the meanest one. Then there's this girl, Emily, who's like her main sidekick. And Ethan briefly dated her, whereas they went to the dance the year before together, but then ended up leaving separately. Unclear exactly what happened there. Seems like he just wasn't interested, and maybe Emily was interested and could still be interested. So Emily hates Lena, but possibly more because of Savannah, it seems, but also because Ethan does like Lena. So I think there's a little bit going on there. And so basically, these girls are described terribly, but he consistently singles out Charlotte because she's fat, or like what he perceives to be as fat, or as in bigger than the other girls. And he's like consistent, like he doesn't describe what these girls are wearing too much or like get too judgmental about it, except when it makes sense when he's describing their dresses for a dance. But when he's going down the list of people, he'll be like, yeah, Savannah, here comes Savannah and Emily and what's her name, and of course Charlotte stuffed into her 2 sizes too small jeans. And it's like, you didn't describe any of the other girls' outfits. Why are you calling out this other girl who's clearly struggling with her body image? And I took huge issue with this. This is definitely a sensitive topic for me, and I hate reading about this. But I was also like, Ethan, where do you get off? And this is where I'm gonna. It's just where I'm reading Ethan as the not like other girls. I'm like, why are you putting other women down like this, authors, Ethan? Girl, like I just felt like this was a very stereotypical and uncomfortable way to describe, and it was a specific thing. It wasn't just with, I take it back, it wasn't just with Charlotte, because there's a security guard at who stands outside, or a police officer who stands outside the one shopping center or the one grocery store in town, and he's always every time he's brought up, he's described as fat and or having a donut in his hand, and it's just like a really uncomfortable.
They also there's a few times I think the moms are referred to as being soft bodied or
right.
larger of the town, and of course everyone in this town, again, there's only a handful of people that are not bad in this town, as far as Ethan is concerned. But yes, I agree with all. I mean, it's really just some run of the mill young adult of the era of fatphobia.
Yeah.
And
it's uncomfortable to read.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I don't remember it so much then, because it definitely wasn't at the forefront of my mind. But every time I read it, I was just and it happened multiple times. So every time I read it, it pissed me off.
And the biggest sin where this is concerned, I have a quote highlighted.
Oh, great.
this actually made me like what, like gasp, like what, like my note is literally just what in all caps. So there's a scene where they go to the snowball.
Mhm.
Ethan,
this is what, yeah.
And,
okay, I was gonna bring this up, so go for it.
There's a moment where it was like, so of course the mean girls, all these girls, basically every girl is a mean girl in this town if they're not Lena.
Yeah. Yep.
They I think they there's like fake snow that they dump all over Lena and like mess up her dress and everything, and it's all chaos. And then I'm pretty sure then Ridley's Lena's cousin. We'll talk about her.
Maybe actually let's just briefly right now. Ridley is Lena's cousin, but she also went dark. So it's not a choice in Lena's family. When they turn 16, they either go dark or light, and that's a huge thing. Is how do you prevent that? You can't. And so Ridley went dark, and now she's at this dance and sees Lena get bullied.
Yeah. So basically, she takes revenge and messes up these girls' dresses at the ball, and
she too singles out Charlotte.
And yes, but then there's this moment where Ethan, he talks about the carnage in front of him of how the whole dance is ruined, and I think saying he doesn't feel sorry for, I think, Emily. So he says, I didn't feel sorry for her, even though I did feel sorry for the people who would be blamed for this nightmare, because obviously Ridley used magic, so they don't know, who did, all this, caused this mess. The student council for their dangerously unstable backdrop. Dickie Wicks, the photographer, that's who Dickie Wicks is, for capitalizing on the misfortune of a fat teenage cheerleader in her underwear.
Yeah. Which, yeah.
So there's a few things. One, that, this photographer is taking photos of this underage girl in her underwear because her dress, her dress ripped, I think it was.
Well, yeah, my reading of it was that Ridley made it tear.
Yeah, she did. And the fact that, so there's this photographer, and the fact that Ethan says that he'd feel bad for this photographer because he's listing that's where I'm like, okay, guys, like that, and like the I mean, it's just, that's a no from me.
yeah, I hated that motif.
And of course, in general, like not excusing any general fat phobia at all, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's not okay, but it's something that I'm like not surprised to see because of the time and the genre.
Yeah, and I would generally agree.
But this specific quote, I was like, guys,
you have to read that and understand what you're writing. Right. Like that. That's not. I don't think that even is something that a 16-year-old would think.
Yeah. And I don't even want to like drag like the authors into this and what their personal feelings may or may not be, because here's the thing: this was 2009. People change. People, and I don't know, maybe, they were really trying to write from the perspective of what they thought a 16-year-old boy would say. I don't know. I'm not really interested in that. I mean, I want there to be nuance in the world, and, what hope do we have if people don't like grow, if we don't want to grow. So I don't want to like get too in on that, but I will say, like, just looking at it for what it is, not a fan of that through line, not a fan of that specific moment.
Yeah. And it doesn't really add.
Yeah.
We already know, even the through line, we already know how judgmental Ethan is. We don't need to know that he's also fatphobic. Like, we don't need that.
It's just like not, and it's something that I just think, again, not every character has to be sympathetic, but in a book and in the genre, you're writing for a younger audience. And nothing in the book really counters his perspective. And it would be one thing if something did,
Yeah.
If there was a moment of either learning or at least another character calling him out, or just something, because not every character that you read from, even in young adult, like, has to be, like, moral or like completely morally, like, that you don't have to side with them on everything, and I think kids can read critically and can decide for themselves whether they agree with something or not, but
But when you have the main character, you know, saying this consistently over and over, it might not.
In a book where a lot of nuance, at least in this book, and you know, there later books, I feel like, I don't know on the topic of like characters having their own biases that are not questioned. I don't know about that.
Yeah,
but
I genuinely
the sense of like, but the greater sense that I have of this being very black and white, dark and light kind of thing. It's just like, you just kind of feel like, oh, there's the goodies and the baddies, and you don't have to question what the goodies.
Right. Exactly. All right, I think maybe now we should move on to the other characters. We've definitely touched upon most of them, but maybe we get a little bit more in depth into Lena now, since she is the secondary main character. Like I said earlier, I definitely would have loved to see more from her perspective. But Lena is, I know I said Ethan is not like other girls. Lena is literally not like other girls, because she is one. And so yeah, but she wants to be, though. I'm not going to say she wants to distinctly be like the bad girls of Gatlin and be those kinds of girls, but she does want to be a part of that world. She wants to have friends, like normal friends, and enjoy school and hang out with people and not feel ostracized, which she is immediately from the start. Like we said, she's Macon Ravenwood's niece, and so she automatically, it seems to me that if she had just moved there and she were a new girl, she still would have been looked at as other, but she might have been more of a novelty. Like, think Bella in Twilight when she moved to Forks. Like, it probably would have been like, ooh, interesting, we don't get new kids all the time, versus, oh, we don't want this new kid. So Lena is magical. Or like we said, she's from this caster family. She can she can't control her magic when we first see her. She doesn't understand a lot of the things that are happening to her. Her family's basically lied to her or omitted the truth in a lot of circumstances about her powers, about her parents, about the family history and things like that. So she's very resistant to the link or the connection, I'll say, since Link is another character. She's very resistant to the connection that she and Ethan have. Because she's got no idea what's going on, but she knows that it could be bad, because she knows that she could be bad. And so throughout most of the book, there's a pretty consistent theme of her she wants to be normal. She's looking for a way to make herself not go dark, but she's also pretty resigned to the fact that she probably will, or she thinks she will, and she's got no way to control it. And she wants to keep Ethan safe. You know, she's very nice, very altruistic, wants to keep Ethan safe. Oh, but I started this with, she's not like other girls, which is that as much as she wants to fit in, she does not try to.
She drives a hearse to school. A hearse.
Yeah, she drives a hearse to school.
Goth queen.
Yes. She dresses, it sounds like it wants to be goth, but it also sounds like she dresses pretty much understated in just darker clothing, and that is goth enough for this town.
Yeah.
Because the way that Ethan describes her clothes, it's like, oh, long black dress thing over black leggings, and it's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, that could be anything. Like, that's not, but it's, anyway. She writes a lot. She writes a lot of poetry. So Ethan reads, she writes. Oh my God, look at the two of these people eschewing all the traditions of the town. Oh, and at one point, I think Link might say something to her about wearing makeup, and Lena crinkles her nose, and Ethan says it's because Lena doesn't wear makeup. She doesn't need it. So, you know, she's not like other girls.
Other girls need makeup. They're born needing it.
Yeah, exactly. Lena's not special.
Well, also, going back to the dance, when they go to the dance, so there's only two types, and this I actually thought was really funny. Like, it was not, like, it was just another extension of, like, the kind of misogyny throughout the book, but I also thought it was kind of hilarious in a way, where Ethan describes, like, what the rest of the girls are wearing to the dance as either they're shopping at Lil Miss or Southern Belles. So Little Miss
is I forget about that.
Sluts, and Southern Belles is for the, you know, the you know, rich white girls,
the Southern Belles.
Yeah. So you know, in Ethan's estimation, there's only 2 types of girls at his school: the sluts and the Southern Belles. The sluts and the white supremacists, basically. So Lena being evidently neither, because she wears, you know, a dress that Macon got for her from Budapest.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she's so different.
Yeah.
So different.
So a lot of my impressions of Lena throughout most of the book are basically.
Oh, to be clear, I just want to. I'm no slut shaming here. That's
all.
Yeah,
no slut shaming.
Words. That's all.
That's Ethan. We do not endorse pretty much anything any of these characters say.
Ethan made his opinions on women showing any sense of any sort of leg or bust. Very
or just curves. You know, tight clothing.
Yeah, if they have any curves at all.
It is our stance. You do you. We don't care. We stand someone who wears what they want and does what they want. Right.
Yeah. But you know, in Ethan's mind, this is what we're working with.
Okay, but back to Lena. So honestly, for most of the book, she's kind of boring. She doesn't have a lot of agency because as much as she says no, Ethan will push past her and what she wants.
And she fuck what she wants either.
Her family doesn't care what she wants either.
Yeah.
Like no one really cares what she wants. She's scared because she thinks that she's only got 6 months until her 16th birthday when her fate is decided for her. And she's just trying to live out her life.
Which again, her fate is whether she's going to go dark or light. And all we really know at this point is dark equals bad and light equals good.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, for most of it, I was kind of bored by her. It felt like she was just the stand-in for Ethan. I mean, we talked about the security guard that Ethan frequently described as fat. She also, when she talks, this is basically in the first real conversation she's ever had with Ethan, she offhandedly refers to the fat security guard who waits outside the Stop and Steal. Like,
which is what makes us feel like that is part of just the author's worldview. Well, okay, I don't want to, at the time, potentially the worldview, even espoused by the greater world, you know, I'm not like going to say that everyone,
right.
It's not, you know, we don't want to direct, because it's just kind of like a broader attitude that people have towards body types, which is sad and bad, and we don't like it. But yeah, there's this general like acceptance that there's this moralizing of you know, body type, which is prevalent in a lot of media.
But it also doesn't even feel, my main point was that it doesn't really even feel like something that Lena would say. She doesn't really become a character of her own until later in the book.
Yes.
Which I mean, if you think about it, could be a nice hidden treat, because she doesn't know about herself and she doesn't know about her powers. And then as she learns it and is able to control it, she becomes a different person. She becomes herself. And so, like, you know, maybe it makes sense that at this point early in the book, when they're having this conversation, she's kind of a mirror for Ethan.
Yeah.
And this is why I would, sorry, say that again?
Yeah. And Ethan doesn't know her yet either. So that's account for some of her becoming more of a character throughout.
Yeah, that's true as well. But this is why I would have loved to read this from Lena's perspective, because I feel like Ethan is pretty set, and I was like, yeah, we're going to move off Ethan. Ethan is
he's our pretty,
Ethan, not to say that he doesn't have character growth, but he's pretty set in his ways, and a lot of the things that happen kind of reinforce the way that he thinks.
Yeah.
Whereas with Lena, there is a lot of growth in her personal journey that we don't really get to see.
I think I would have liked, my ideal world, to see a dual perspective where we get Ethan chapter, Lena chapter, you know, an even breakdown necessarily, but I would have liked, because I think it would have been a lot to live in Lena's head for the entire book, because she's a lot of turmoil for a lot of time. And I don't know, for me personally, like, it's a personal preference. I know not everyone likes this, but I love when we get as many perspectives as you can fit in one book without it like being too much.
And it's especially nice because when you have someone as strong someone with such a strong perspective as Ethan has, it's nice to kind of get a break from that. And I think maybe that would have made some of my feelings toward him a little less strong, because I wouldn't have been, oh, here we go again, Ethan. Here we go again, Ethan.
Right. And to have characters that maybe have opinions that counter, you can build more nuance, right? Because it's easier to have characters who, again, are not perfect. They don't have the perspective on everything. They're growing teenagers. They have their prejudices and their biases and things like that. And you can keep that in there and have characters who have different perspectives, and it just makes it a more, a richer world. And that's what I think a lot of different perspectives, especially when you're first person, because here's the thing. If you're a third person, if that's the perspective you're telling a story from, you can take a step back from that character and create a bit more distance, or you can even be kind of a close third, but like still throw in observations about the character or about the ways that the character functions that the character wouldn't necessarily be conscious of.
Right.
And so since we're in first person and we're just so smack in his perspective, and it is one that's just like very, like you said, very strong, and maybe sometimes hard to see whether we're supposed to be like, yeah, Ethan, or like, not sure about this, Ethan. I think having multiple perspectives would have been nice.
I agree, and it would have made sense, obviously, to have it from Lena's perspective as well, her being the second main character.
And given the fact that the most of the plot really revolves around her, like it's funny. Yeah. It's like a chosen one story, but not from the perspective of the chosen one. Like Ethan does have his own little thing going on,
right? And he learns about his family, but it's you're right. Do you have anything else to say about Lena? Because I actually kind of want to move on to the other characters.
Yeah, let's move on to. Okay. We're already at a lot of time.
Yeah, and there'll be more stuff that we'll say about Lena too. But honestly, that just goes to show you, like, she, as much as it's about her, she is a secondary character. It's from Ethan's perspective. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about Emma, I guess. So as we said earlier, Emma is Ethan's housekeeper / mother figure now that his mother has died, and she's been with the family for a long time. And she is a Southern woman. Who is,
so we think, so it seems that, and the thing is, neither of us caught a really firm description of her throughout the book, right? But she practices voodoo. It's mentioned. That's how they say it in the book. I looked it up a little bit, researched it a bit. It seems like it's something that came from Haiti, specifically from like Haitian slaves.
Right.
It was created from kind of an old African religion and combined with Christianity. So we get the sense from that background that it's likely that Emma is Black. So, and also from our first non-white characters,
her ancestors as well. What it's alluded to is that they were also they also practiced voodoo, but they also were in a similar position in terms of being housekeepers or with families.
And again, right, like we don't get into the history of that.
Yeah, none of it is clear. I don't think that,
because there's her ancestor Ivy who worked with. So there's flashbacks we mentioned to Ethan Waite of the past, Ethan's ancestor of the same name, and Genevieve, who is Lena's ancestor of the same name, and basically we didn't really mention this, but they're kind of playing out the same tragic love story that Ethan and Genevieve had back in the day.
And in that scenario, there is a woman, Ivy, who is basically seems like Genevieve's housekeeper.
But given that this is the Confederate South,
you can make assumptions,
and
they aren't written in the book. And I don't think anyone is described as Black or white in the book.
No, but they describe her skin color. I think they say her caramel color,
right?
Skin, which that's
there's a lot. There's a lot that you could unpack, but we're not going to. And a lot of it is because it's hard because it's not in the text. So you're making assumptions, and there's coding for sure.
It's worth mentioning because the text doesn't really touch it, and that's again bothersome. It feels like it like takes a step towards that.
Yeah, it's afraid to say anything,
and then
in a book about in a book very heavily influenced
by the Confederate South.
It doesn't ever explicitly say that.
By United States history. I mean, let's be real.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really can't separate that there's, I mean,
no.
But anyway.
So Emma, she practices voodoo. She is basically she's the help me here. This is a literary term. So I want to talk about Emma and Macon actually together because they're basically foils of one another. Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah.
So Emma knows about all of the magic and things. Ethan has grown up not knowing anything about it. Turns out Emma knew about it. His mom knew about it. And his Aunt Marion knew about it. And we'll talk about them. But Emma actually practices it, and she knows Macon, the town shut-in, which is a huge revelation. And so Macon and Emma are both protecting their respective areas, and they work begrudgingly together because they're aware of how, if Lena goes dark, that could have catastrophic effects. Oh, the reason that this could have catastrophic effects for everybody, mortal and powerful, is because Macon suspects Lena is not a cataclysm, a natural, which means that she has
dark aspect of a natural is a cataclysm.
Yeah, and so naturals and cataclysts have crazy amounts of power, more than any of the other casters. So if Lena goes dark,
it took us a while to get to this point. It takes the book a real fucking long time to reveal anything to us. We are in the dark for most of the book.
Yeah, pretty much. So Emma and Macon kind of go hand in hand in the sense that they're both doing the same things or similar things for the different sides of human and caster. And like I said, they work begrudgingly together. Emma doesn't like Macon. She doesn't really like interacting with him. He's an incubus, which means it's a fancy word for vampire, but he is specifically a dream vampire. So he feeds on dreams. He's got a brother, Hunting, who is a literal vampire, but they're called incubus.
Incubi.
Incubi. And so that's Macon's power. It's not a caster. I don't really understand how that fits into the family.
Yeah, we aren't told. There's a lot of the stuff we're just not told.
I don't understand how he can be an incubus and not a caster in a family of casters. But that's fine.
And it's like one of those things where, again, like if we have this character Ethan who's to this world, who doesn't know any of this stuff, and you're still not telling us this stuff when it comes up, and he's not questioning it as much as like I am when I'm reading it, that's where I'm taken out of the
story. Right.
That's really.
But so Emma's super protective of Ethan.
So here's something I really enjoyed about Emma. I mean, there's a lot you could say about her character, and obviously the ways that her portrayal isn't, great.
Yeah.
But as a character, like her personality and everything, I mean, one little detail that I really did enjoy was her affinity for, and this is where a general thing I'll say for the whole book, is that there are some moments of specificity that really do give the story life in a way that I think a lot of young adult novels that maybe I wasn't as into back in the day, or even now, and I still read some, when they're lacking specificity, it just really feels like a kind of a soulless read, and there's really nothing to grab onto. It just kind of feels like another run-of-the-mill story. But when there are moments like with Emma, she and Ethan have this thing where she loves the crossword, and so she'll spell out words. And like it's in a crossword, and she'll be like, 11 down or whatever. Things like that. And Ethan will do that back to her. It's like their little inside joke.
Yeah, you're right. I do like that. And there are some other moments in the book too, like especially this, I feel like gets kind of lost by the end, but like her cooking and how much she cooks and what she cooks and like how good a cook she is. And I think that actually touches upon what I liked about it when I first read it, because it did feel like it was different than other novels where I felt like there was more slice of life kind of stuff that I do find interesting. And even with Ethan visiting his old aunts and the way that they interact with one another and like their zaniness and
they adopt those baby squirrels and he has to he has to dig holes in the yard so that they can learn to forage for nuts.
Yeah, and there's just like little random things that, you know, kind of don't further the plot, but also show who these people are, which I liked.
Yeah, I think I would have liked if we got some more of that with Lena's family, because Lena's family, we 100%. Had small moments, but like we really didn't, like they were,
and they're the interesting ones. Like, let's face it, they're the ones who've got powers.
Yeah. So
we're seeing the perspective of a bunch of people that Ethan hates. We're seeing their slice of life. Like, let's see the interesting people.
Right. And again, I would like to see, like, that's the thing, is I would like to see more specificity in the Castor family that we got from Ethan's family.
Agreed, 100%.
And I know that it's from his perspective, but, you know, he did go to their house sometimes, and he seems like he starts to get to know them more. Right. They hang out a lot, you know, he and Lena, and the family seems to know him by the end. So, like, can we see more of that? That's really what I would have liked. Because that was, I think, some of the strengths of the book, was creating this sense of family and a sense of, you know, just, this is a very specific family, rather than like, oh, you know,
it's a generic
family number. 157. Which it could have been.
Back to Emma. I liked her character a lot. I feel like they could have done more with her. Yeah, I feel like they could have done more with her. Not that she was there plenty. She's clearly a very powerful person, but because she's so powerful, I feel like sometimes she was left, like, sometimes we go for a longer time than it made sense until we saw her again, given how big of a part she is,
especially given how protective she was said to be over Ethan, and how many times it was like, oh, she's gonna kill me for this, or like,
and then she didn't,
it could just be like the perspective of the child who, like, you know, and there are moments where, like, you know, she's definitely overbearing. Like, she and Macon are both overbearing. And, you know, it's something that was really frustrating, but I think frustrating in a way that was like, it was meant to be, because they're teenagers and these are adults, and the adults are keeping things from them and not necessarily doing a good job at all. And that's not necessarily like a failing of the story, but more of a point that I think could be explored as like, oh, when adults don't tell the truth. Of course, we learn more why Macon and Emma won't tell the truth, because there's an aspect of Lena's turning dark or light that I didn't remember.
I didn't remember. The things I didn't remember about this book are astonishing.
Yeah, there's a lot I didn't remember. But let's talk about, because we have to really get through some more of the characters.
I know.
So let's talk about some of the things that I did like. Because we're gonna talk about Link.
Talk about Link.
Let's talk about Link.
Although I will say, I did like Macon. Macon was one of my favorite characters, because he's just like a little. Yeah.
He frustrated the hell out of me, but I could see him being a favorite character.
No, he was super frustrating, but what I liked was his tidiness, and not word, but he was, you know, you imagine him, he's basically like, I don't know, talk about Link. I gotta get my thoughts together.
Link, he's just so freaking funny, okay? I just love that. Anytime he's on page, he's making me laugh. He's bringing the levity, and we really need that in the story.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: he is guilty of the same kind of like misogyny, I would say, as Ethan is in his head, in terms of, like, you know, he'll say a thing like, half the time Ethan will be saying like, oh, you know, because there's a lot of gender essentialism, right, in this book. So it's like, oh, Ethan's like, oh, girls, you know, oh, Link told me that girls, you know, all, you know, when they say that they don't want to be asked to the dance, they actually do, or whatever. When they say they gift, that actually means that they do want one. When they say they don't want to be asked out, they actually do. You know, so there's a lot of that, and then like, oh, girls this, boys that, and I mean,
I'm thinking about more things about Ethan.
Yeah, we mentioned that there's not a lot of diversity in this book in terms of race. There's also like no diversity in terms of gender or sexual orientation, and that's just, you know, that's just par for the course. But Link, you know, in spite of the fact that like he's definitely like he's like always like described through Ethan's eyes as like, you know, oh, he's kind of comes across as like kind of dumb, like, but at the same time, like, because he's so freaking funny and he like brings levity and he brings interest, I just freaking love him. His full name is Wesley Jefferson Lincoln, but he
Yeah.
goes by Link. He, in this town where, you know, everyone's evidently raised to be like the same kind of cookie cutter person, you understand why Ethan is best friends with him, because he's like, he doesn't really seem to care. Like, he cares about appearances, it seems, as much as it will.
As much as he has to.
As much as he has to not get in trouble with his mom, basically.
Yeah.
Not have her lock him in the basement.
But he wants to, he like Ethan wants to leave this town. He wants to be
he wants to be a
guitarist in a band, lead singer. I think he's also a lead singer.
And he sings, yeah. He, you know, Ethan says he's not good.
Yeah, pity for him.
Yeah, he's just, but he's like, he's a musician. He, you know, he wants to get out of the town. He is someone who, like Ethan says, you know, like that he and Link don't always like see eye to eye or get along, but like Link always has his back, and that is proven throughout the book.
One of the
and it's just like sometimes the things he says, like even if they are like kind of offensive by like standards of like today and how we, you know, like I just like I'm like I forgive you because you're funny.
Well, and I also think he's generally like good-hearted. One of the things I like about Link is that he has character growth. So like you said, he starts and he's just like doing the bare minimum in terms of keeping in line, but also just in general. He won't go to Lena's house. He's fine with Lena. He's like chill. And they eventually become friends, but he won't go to her house. He'll drive her there, but he won't go into her house because he like is afraid his mom will know. At first he sides with the basketball team, but he's also just super middle of the road, right? But he does become less middle of the road. And so we can talk about one of your other favorite characters, Ridley, because Link and Ridley start dating, and Ridley is a siren. So she has the ability to control him. And the implication is, and even though Ethan is super worried about Link dating Ridley, he basically does the bare minimum to try to persuade him not to date her. Which, okay, she's a siren. He's probably got no power over that anyway. But then also, like, Link skips town and like goes to New York City with Ridley. And when Link gets back, Ethan doesn't ask him how the trip went and is basically like, yeah, I don't want to touch that. And I'm like, okay, this guy's your best friend. You need to check on him a little bit. Yeah. But so Link starts dating Ridley, and Link starts becoming more outspoken and an activist. Like there's a hearing that there's a hearing that the school has because everyone hates Lena, and she broke a window. They think, even though they can't prove it, it was with her powers. She didn't break the window herself. It just shattered, but everyone blamed it on her anyway. Interesting how they got that right, but and she didn't do it on purpose. But whatever, it doesn't matter. The strange stuff happens around Lena. The school and the town hate it, so they have a hearing to basically decide if she's kicked out of school or not. And so at this hearing, his mom is leading the charge, but Link still like shouts out like it wasn't her fault. And first of all, Link wasn't in that class, so I don't know how he knows. He says it wasn't her fault or no one got hurt. And again, he wasn't there, so okay, fine. But like he's standing up for Lena, which he never would have done in the beginning of the book. And then, there was another example I had too. But basically, like through dating Ridley, or maybe it was through dating Ridley, maybe it was through getting to know Lena more. But like Link has a character arc, and Link becomes a different person, or not a different person, but he becomes a more world-wise, like outspoken person.
You know what's interesting? Because when you put it like that, technically Ethan has the same character arc. He starts dating Lena and he becomes more outspoken. Now here's the
true.
Yeah. Here's the thing why I think maybe it works more for you with Link than it works with Ethan is because we're inside Ethan's head.
True.
And we don't see the progression as like a, again, because we're seeing also all his judgments of the other people. Like those things don't change. Like he already had this in him, and then he just started actually like doing.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
And we didn't really get to see like as much of a heartfelt struggle in him, even though there are times when he says it. There's a lot of saying, but not a lot of showing how he's feeling. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about like losing some feeling with Ethan and just not feeling the story through him the way I think, you know, I have in other stories that I've read. And so with Link, when you're watching it from the outside, you don't have that interiority to go by. You're like, oh, well, like this dude's changing.
Yeah, and I also think, again, you're right. We don't know what it is like that, but I think the implication is that, you know, he doesn't think of things the same way that Ethan does. You know, as much as he might also want to leave the town, he's still, you know, in the town. It's not necessarily the same judgment that Ethan has, or so we think, because
so it seems like more of it seems like it might have been more of a journey for him.
I mean, when he first did, I think that was the first time he like picked his side, basically. At first I was like, no, I don't like this. That's not like Link. But then I realized that he had been dating Ridley, and like I took that as to be like, what?
Had he at that point?
I think so.
I don't remember if that. I guess. Now
I think so, because I have it in my notes that I was like, why did he do that? And then I was like, is it because he's been hanging out with Ridley?
I also took it though because he and Lena, and again, this is like, it's not just like Link interacting with Ethan or whatever. Link interacting with Lena is more interesting than like Ethan and Lena interacting.
100%. They don't have too much interaction, but I love their interactions.
When the back and forth is so,
it's just nice. It's like funny. Friends. Yeah, it's just friends, like hanging around. I don't know. It's nice, and that Link gives something to Lena that Ethan cannot, which is a normal friend, unconnected to or disconnected from anything that is the craziness that's going on in her life.
Yeah. And it's really nice to see. And so that's why I also think that it's not necessarily just through dating Ridley, because again, we'll talk about her siren powers, but you could spin it that way too.
Yeah, I had that in my head as the catalyst.
Reading it as just like Link genuinely got to know Lena, liked her as a friend, and was like, I should stand up for this.
I think in my head, and maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but in my head, like he had more of those friend interactions with her after he started dating Ridley.
I don't remember it that way, but it's kind of hard for me to remember when that actually happened, because I think that only happened at the dance. The dance is kind of pretty far through.
It is pretty far in.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd definitely been like driving her places, and
no, it's before, because there's scenes when he's hanging out they're hanging out at lunch and he's having a fun conversation with the two of them, and that's when Ethan asks her to the dance.
Yeah, and I thought that was after.
No, because Ridley shows up at the dance.
Okay, I was gonna ask our listeners to tell us who was right, but I think it's you.
Yeah, no, because I So that's the other thing too, is like I think there's a certain part towards the middle where the book started to drag, and then we started to get more scenes where they're back. I think it's when they're really like, when Ethan and Lena were really going off on their own, like looking in. They go to the library, and then they go to the Castor library, which is different, to like learn more about like these visions that they're having of Ethan and Genevieve, and seeing what that means and all that. And they're kind of like, that was kind of boring for me, honestly. But then they get back a little bit back into like the school stuff and the everyday stuff, and that's when we get more scenes with Link, and that's where things picked up again, where they are all hanging out as friends, and we get some more just like banter and like fun stuff, and the dance happened, which is a lot of things, but at least it wasn't boring.
All right, let's get to Ridley, because there's so much more that we have to say, and we are already at over.
So Ridley, the other character, so I definitely had a thing for Link and Ridley back in the day. They were like, I was like, I wish the book was about them. You know, because like, but that's always, it's like, Ridley reminds me of another character, like the bad girl, like the quote unquote like evil like girl, who, you know, is nevertheless important to the story, especially in later books, if I remember correctly. It's like you remember those books, Blue Bloods? Melissa De La Cruz, and there's a character called Mimi who's like,
oh yeah,
in the beginning, like mean girl, whatever, but she ends up being one of my favorite characters. I totally was so into her, like reading those books growing up, and I really just was so bored of the main couple, Skylar and Jack, who were like, kind of like the same situation.
Yeah,
here.
Like Ridley is such a fun distraction from what's going on.
So really shows up somewhere like midway through the book, when she
maybe a little bit earlier.
Let's preface it. She's a siren. She can control people. So there's a lot of questions
she's
that
bad.
talk about with consent there. That's bad.
Yeah.
And she's gone dark. So we're to understand that means bad. And to Ethan, aside from the fact that like obviously controlling people, there's a lot you can get into with the morality of that. But Ethan's main concern seems to be that she's a slut.
Because she dresses.
She shows up. She's sucking on a red lollipop, and that lollipop, man. The amount, I don't know if Ethan like intends to, but there's a few times when he talks about her licking that lollipop, and I'm just like, dude, did you mean it that way? Like,
yeah.
So she shows up and she basically like casts her power on him to get him to come with her. She takes him to the Ravenwood, which is Lena's that uncle's house, Macon's house, where she's staying for some caster holiday that they're celebrating. He was not invited to, but she, coerces him to get in the car, and he mentions that she's like, dressed. I think she's showing a lot of cleavage. He's like really kind of, he goes really all out with his descriptions of that. And he mentions she's sucking on a lollipop. And he says, it almost felt like she was sucking it all out of me. Like she sucked on that sticky red lollipop, the one she kept licking as she drove, which is her basically making him tell her a bunch of information about his relationship with Lena. And I'm just like,
no, it was uncomfortable. Honestly, all of Ethan's interactions with Ridley were uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable. And then she shows up at the dance later on in the story. And obviously, like, yeah, he doesn't like her because she's dark and she took control of him and, like, almost killed him at one point. So, like, it's fair for him to not like her, but it's just the really sexualized way, in a way that's very, like,
It doesn't make sense for this book.
Yeah. There's another line that actually made me laugh, is when she shows up to the dance with Link, and this is the second time we see her, much later on in the book, and he's trying to convince Link that she's no good for him, and he's like, but he's like fully under her thrall or whatever. It's honestly unclear. I mean, it's indicated that she is using her power on Link, but I think it's also indicated that Link would have liked her anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure he would have been totally into it. But Ethan's not into sluts because,
yeah. Slut's bad.
Yeah. But he says, I gave it another half-hearted try. She's bad news, man. She's messing with your head. She'll suck you in and spit you out when she's done. And Link, he grabbed my shoulders with both hands. Suck away. And I was like,
there's so much like just.
Honey, he walked right into that. And
yeah.
I think my note is like, that's what he wants her to do.
Well, like it just doesn't seem like that's not what someone would. That's not how someone would describe it. Like,
I feel like Ethan is saying this very clear double entendre in a way that he does not understand that it's a double entendre.
Right. Yeah.
But he's not a slut. So he wouldn't know. And he also describes her dress as being like a loincloth at one point. Her loincloth of a dress.
Which doesn't make any sense, because that would mean a loincloth is something, unless I'm wrong, my understanding of a loincloth is something that like men wear around their nether regions, and like there's no top to it. Yeah. So obviously,
I mean, she's showing a lot of cleavage is basically what he's saying.
Yeah, but she's still not showing nipple, one can assume.
Then again, the way he describes her, oh my god.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like Ethan does not describe as much as he describes Charlotte's fat body. Like, he does not describe even Lena's outfits to the extent that he describes Ridley's.
You know what? And that's the thing. I think the reason why Ridley is a fun character, because she does have some quips in there. Like, we didn't really talk about her personality, but she's very quippy. But you also get glimpses of like, so she's supposed to be dark, so she's like bad, quote unquote. And obviously she coerces Ethan to go with her to a caster party early on, and then almost kills him when she has a fight with Lena, and she like constricts his breathing, she's and the whole family basically slut shames her, which is also another thing where it's like you kind of like feel bad for her, because we'll talk about it, but like we don't really know what going dark means, and they just treat her like a pariah, and they're like, and like she left on her birthday when she felt herself going dark, and they haven't seen her since then, and she shows up, and they're like, ew, get away, slut. Like,
yeah, I do really want to get to the magic, so can I just quickly skip to like his mom, dad, and Marion?
Okay, fine, yeah, we can talk about.
Because we're going to talk more about Ridley with the magic. So,
yeah.
And I don't think we're going to talk so much about his dad. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, his dad, my thought is his dad's only reason to be such a shut-in, the only discernible reason I could figure out was so to keep Ethan out of the library, his dad's study, basically, for most of the book, so Ethan wouldn't find the information in there right away. Like it didn't serve much purpose for his dad. His dad is basically nocturnal now. He writes and writes and writes at night, sleeps during the day, barely comes out of his study. And then Ethan finds out that, like late in the book, sorry, his dad is a writer. And he says he's working on the next great American novel, but Ethan finds out when he goes into his dad's office that for months he's just been scribbling on paper. He's not actually writing anything, which is a horrifying realization that was not. I needed more from that.
Yeah, I was actually, it was like kind of sickening because it was just like as a kid, like, you know, your mom just died, and you know, you had a good relationship with her. She was, you know, Ethan, his mom, you know, is important. We'll talk about her, but she was important to him. And then your dad just completely shuts down and is you know, basically losing his mind, and as you knew him, is no longer really around. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, I could project some emotion into caring about Ethan, and so during one of these scenes was actually like when I was really feeling more for him, because he's just like, that's so horrible. But yeah, the story doesn't really give it the
it's not explored at all, and yeah, and so that's pretty much all to say about his dad. Is like horrible things happening. He's in a bad place, and that's it. He doesn't know anything about the magic. Like, he doesn't know his mom. Ethan's mom did, though. Ethan's mom actually was very involved in documenting the Castor genealogy, is that what it's called, for Macon, and like the history of the Castors.
Yeah.
Which Ethan is shocked to find out. He finds this out from his Aunt Marion. And so I've got a fun little theory about his mom and his dad and his Aunt Marion. No doubt his dad really loved his mom, because his dad is destroyed by her death. So much so that he can't even interact with his own son, and he can't, you know, he's incapacitated basically. His mom, so his dad is from Gatlin. His mom is from, I want to say Georgia. Ithaca?
Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, Georgia. I was like, oh, I was way wrong. And his mom went to Duke with his Aunt Marion, and Marion might be, I don't know where she's from, but she's not from Gatlin. She moved to Gatlin with Ethan's mom. And so the two of them,
only other non-white character.
Yeah,
like Emma and
right?
Emma and Ivy. Marion is the character we're talking about.
Oh, I thought you were saying Emma and Marion are the only two, but you were also including Ivy. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, my thought is, so basically his mom moves to this small town to be with Ethan's dad, only it's really to do more research in this Castor life and such. It's unclear to me, and maybe you can correct me, but it's unclear to me that she discovered this after she moved here. I think it seems to me that she moved to Gatlin specifically to do her research, and Marion went with her, and she introduced Marion to all of the Castor information.
Seems like it. We don't really get a definitive answer on this, like,
no,
in this book.
But so, like, my theory is that, like, his mom and his Aunt Marion, I think I shipped them together. Because like, why else would Marion move to this small town? And his mom didn't move here. Well, okay, you can argue that his mom did move here to marry his dad. But it seems like the ulterior motive was to study the casters with Macon Ravenwood, and Marion follows her to this town where it seems like they don't have anything in common with any of the other people. Ethan makes it pretty clear Marion and his mom are not like the other women in Gatlin. And so I'm just like, why else would you follow your research partner to a shithole town that people are going to hate you and you're not going to get along with them? Why else would you do?
We need queer characters somewhere in this.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I'm starving for queer characters. So here they are. I ship them. And that's what I think. And so now that Ethan's mom has passed, Marion is the main researcher about the casters, and she also runs the caster library. She runs the Gatlin library and the caster library. And the caster library is only open on days when the regular library is closed, so on holidays and such. And it's also only open at night. It's open from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Yes.
And with that, I think we can make our way into the magic.
We didn't really talk about his mom, though, and there's something I wanted to say about that.
Fine, you can talk about his mom.
Okay. So his mom, his mom obviously, passed away not too long before the start of the book, to be honest. I kind of it felt like it was longer in some moments when he was reflecting on her, but it wasn't.
Right.
And we felt that loss, I think, towards the beginning, but we sort of lost the thread of it towards the middle. But then there was this moment later on in the story I really liked. So there were some scenes I actually really liked. And it's so there's a moment when Lena very briefly tries to break up with Ethan for his own good. And like really only lasts like a day.
It was really funny because he had literally just quit the basketball team because they didn't like Lena and he was done with them. And then like the next paragraph, she tries to break up with him.
Yeah. But in this moment, we kind of get like almost beginning of the book Ethan back, in the sense that like when he's not with Lena, we feel like he's more of a character than I think I felt at some points when because he was all about her and describing her story, because she kind of has more going on than he does. Like she is his story, but then we get more of his story when she breaks up with him. So he ends up going to meet his Aunt Marion at the library, and he's really feeling down, obviously, and he's missing his mom. And we really haven't seen like as much of that throughout the book, but you're really feeling like this loss now, because
that was a poignant moment. Like that was, for sure.
This whole scene, he's describing like this Christmas village, because it's like around Christmas time, that his mom, really loved growing up to set up around the house, and I think they're missing parts of it, and he's like sad, and he's missing her. And then he goes to see his Aunt Marion, and she's sitting in the library, actually reading some books, and she starts doing this thing where she said she's been picking up these books that she found that were just randomly piled in the library, which I think we're supposed to infer maybe because his mom, there's actually some supernatural stuff going on with her, where she's maybe a ghost or something, and she's influencing some things.
It's unclear. That's Ethan's interpretation.
But at this point, we don't necessarily know that, but there's some books piled in the library that Marion found, and Ethan goes and sits with her, and she says that she's been just opening these books and to random like pages, and she's always finding a quote that like means something to her situation. And so like she's like, Ethan, you try it, and he does. And I'm having trouble sorting through my notes now to find like what they were, but what I liked about this particularly, because just from like a personal connection from my life, is like one thing that it's one thing that I connected to on a personal level, because like of course in this book we're supposed to believe that there's some kind of destiny, there's some kind of magic, there's some kind of something going on that's leading them to these quotes that mean things to them and whatnot. But something in real life that I think can be true too. And so like I have these tins that I store like these quotes that I wrote down and cut up and put into like these these kind of jars that I have, where I'll like pull one out every so often and see what they say. And a lot of times, like, I'll get something that's directly related to like whatever I'm thinking about and this and that. And it just, again, that specificity that really feels like like a moment of because we learned that his mom like really revered books and words. You know, Ethan described that his mom said there was something along the lines of like a quote that was like, any book is the good book. You know, basically like you can
the good book being generally people refer to the Bible as the good book, but his mom said any book is the good book, and that did not go over well in this very Christian town.
Yeah, and you know, basically she's saying like you can find, you know, God, what, not necessarily meaning like the strictly Christian version of the word, but in any book.
Yeah,
and I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And you kind of see that carried through in the scene with him and Marion, and they're finding these quotes.
But I also like that scene too, because he opened the book and he didn't like know right away what the quote meant. Like to him, like I think he couldn't quite place it initially, and I like that because like it felt real. It was like, oh, I don't know. He didn't just know instantly, like, oh my gosh, this is the key to whatever. It was like, yeah, okay, I'm a normal person now, and this is a normal person thing to do, and he's feeling lost, and like,
yeah,
I agree. I thought that was really good scene.
And then he goes into his mom's study, and he's just like, you know, because he said something about like, oh, you know, going to her funeral, like, you know, or going to her grave site. It's just, I don't feel as connected with her as I do when I go into her study that they have in the library for her. And, you know, we see that Marion didn't touch any of it. She didn't move anything around. So he goes and he sits there, and it's just really nice. And it was very feeling for him as a character. And I felt connected to the character. And it was like, we kind of needed Lena out of the picture for a little while to get that back. Because we lose that, you know, when she's around, like I said, it's all about her from his point. And we forget sometimes that he's got his own like background and stuff going on, because it might be mentioned, but it's just not felt or explored.
Yeah. Agreed.
It gets lost. So I really enjoyed that, and so that was a really strong connection with his mom, and things that were just like, you know, it might have been a little hard to read, but it was really it was heartfelt, and so I liked that, and it brought more character to her and to him.
Definitely. And then he and Lena get back together later that night.
Yeah, so it's very short-lived. But yeah, so then let's talk about the magic system.
Yes. Without further ado, let's tie this all together.
Okay.
The magic.
Ooh. So it's very, I think this is like, it's very confusing, is it not? Because to me, I was very confused throughout the whole, and I think part of it is because you said earlier, it's kind of presented as this mystery to us. And obviously we start with Ethan not knowing anything about it, even if his mom did, even if he might have some kind of magic, but he's not a caster. We don't really know. But he doesn't know a lot about it. So you'd think, okay, like we're learning along with him. Right. But then it's also like he meets Lena, who is a caster, and she's in that world, and she's from that world. But it seems like she doesn't know that much about it either.
Yeah, she doesn't have the answers that he's looking for, which I think frustrates him.
Yeah, and it frustrates me too.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it doesn't seem to make sense. And so we mentioned there's this element where all casters, when they turn 16, they are claimed, they call it, for the dark or the light.
But most casters can choose.
Yes, but most casters, can choose whether they are dark or light, but there's some kind of family curse, and they learn through these visions that they were having of Genevieve and Ethan that it started when Ethan was shot and Genevieve tried to bring him back to life, in the past.
Let's talk about those visions for a second. Is that going to interrupt your flow? Because I think that's a good thing to.
Yeah, let's talk.
We haven't really done that. So when Ethan and Lena first have their first real conversation, I think I mentioned earlier, it's super cringe. It's when Ethan was like, yeah, I read. Oh, how weird. They also find they're in Ravenwood is a plantation. It's on a hello South, hello slavery, hello all that. In it through all of it, but
we really, again, like I'm so distracted half this book by like the question of like, but wait, did casters own slaves?
Right. Yeah.
Like what is
the history there? Like, I mean, well, that's an interesting thing because, okay, now we're going in a different direction, but they do have so Ravenwood, Macon's house, is magic, and it can change form. And they also have the ability to, I think, magic the food, but like Macon will call it kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Kitchen will make the food. And something else, I don't remember but it's just a very interesting, like, what does that mean? Like, is that, I don't know. That's one aspect of their magic, or at least the house's magic, because I don't think it's Macon's magic since he's an incubus, as we discussed. But okay, so Lena is upset at school. She goes home. Ethan follows her home, and then she's in Greenbrier, which is the neighboring plantation, and that was burned down in the Civil War along with a lot of other plantations. The Northerners came, or the Union soldiers, once they won against the Confederates in Gatlin, burned a lot of the plantations, which, I mean, that's definitely a thing. Oh no, my computer is interrupting my flow. Sorry. That's definitely a thing in the Civil War. I mean, there's nuance to everything, and Union soldiers like burn shit and hurt people, like, too. And so that's one of the things that we do see is Union soldiers burning plantations. So they're in the remnants of this plantation, Greenbrier. And Greenbrier?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And they find a locket. And immediately, as soon as they touch this locket, it transports them into a vision of that time when the Union soldiers are burning all of the plantations, and they see this character Genevieve, and she's running through the fields trying to get back to Greenbrier to warn her family. I think that's kind of where it stops in the first one, because these visions that like happen continuously, and they reveal more and more information. And so every time Ethan and Lena touch the locket, pretty much they get pulled into these new visions. And so we learn through them that Genevieve is like a member of the family that belonged in Greenbrier. Is she Duquesne?
Yes, I think. It's
a little unclear. There are genealogy trees, but I didn't follow them. So, like, it was a little bit hard to remember throughout. But she's basically a relative of an ancestor of Lena's, and she lives in Greenbrier, and Greenbrier is being burned down. She's running back to warn her mom and her sister, but then she runs into Ethan Waite, who is Ethan's ancestor. Ethan Carter Waite? Yeah. Ethan Carter Waite. So he's Ethan's ancestor. And apparently Genevieve hasn't seen Ethan in 2 years when she runs into him, but they're like lovers, or they think they're going to get married. And Genevieve is a caster and Ethan is mortal. And it was really underwhelming. Like, I know she had a lot on her mind, but when Genevieve first saw Ethan after 2 years, it was like, oh, Ethan, what are you doing here? Not like, oh my God, Ethan. But I thought that was funny. But anyway, so we try to be a little bit quicker here. We find out through these visions that this night, the Union soldiers burned down Greenbrier, apparently with Genevieve's mother and sister still inside, and she's informed of this by Ivy, who, as we mentioned, is Emma's ancestor, and the, like, let's call her housekeeper since we don't know, and she's informed of this. And then, so at the same time, I think, is Ethan hit by a stray bullet or something because the Union soldiers are still around? What?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so
I think they shoot him.
Yeah. So while like Genevieve is distraught about her family being killed, Ethan gets shot, and like he's basically down for the count, and Genevieve goes crazy, and she's, as one probably would in this scenario, but she's a caster, and so she like makes Ivy take her to the Book of Moons, which is the scariest book of all the books in all the
caster library.
Yeah. And she basically pulls out a spell that's supposed to bring Ethan back to life, and she's got to pay a price for it. It comes with a price. And so she does the spell. Ivy's like, no, don't do it. She does the spell. Ethan comes back to life for like a minute, dies again, but now Genevieve is left with the consequences of her actions, which one, it turns her dark. She was a light caster, now she's a dark caster. So it not only changed, her eyes were green because she was a light caster, now they're yellow and like have cat eyes basically. And she also cursed all of the rest of her family to basically be claimed for the light or dark. They can't claim themselves. They have no choice in the matter, and that's just what it is.
I think it's every female. Yeah.
Oh, that makes so much sense because I was so confused about Larkin and how he could choose.
Yeah, every female descendant. She cursed the rest of her female descendants to have no agency, basically. Which I mean, that's like a curse that it's working backwards, but okay. Yeah. Which is again like an interesting thing because like there is this. So she's dark, and that's why Lena didn't. But that's the thing is like Lena's afraid of going dark. She doesn't know why originally, so they're solving the mystery of like why that's a curse, and then once they find out that it like is a curse, they get the Book of Moons and they basically dig it out of her grave actually, and
Genevieve has the Book of Moons in her grave, and
they're reading it to try to find out if there's anything in there that can stop her from having to be claimed because she doesn't know what she's going to be claimed for. So it's again this internal struggle that it would have been nice to maybe see from her perspective. But that brings me to the crux of my issue with the magic system as we know it in this first book, and I
really don't remember. It'll be interesting to read the next ones.
But I mean, I remember actually there was something I thought that happened in this book that I'm really pissed happens. I think in the second book because I was ready to talk about it.
Okay, well, don't.
But basically, my thing with this magic system is, what does it mean to be dark or light? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
we don't really know because, and this is, I think, just a thing of like. Of just having like a good guys versus bad guys thing that maybe it's just something that I've grown out of or just not as interested in or but I don't really, I mean on a fundamental level like in real life I don't believe in that like people are inherently good or evil. Like I don't think that that's necessarily a thing. Like I don't think there's like an essence that is evil and an essence that is good. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But this is kind of indicating that there is an essence, right? There's something essential. And again, going into the essentialism, there's a lot of essentialism throughout this book that I think some of it's just a product of the times. And that essentialism goes into even the small moments of just misogyny and gender essentialism where it's like, oh, boys and girls, this, and there's no nuance. And of course, we look at that a lot differently than we did back then. Because even though that back then that might have still been annoying, I think there's a lot more, a lot of different things have come up where in gender where it's more mainstream, where a lot of people have just more nuanced ideas about it that things aren't so binary and such. But even just like on a certain level, like, there's a lot of gender essentialism. There's a lot of essentialism in terms of like, other members of the town bad, incapable of change, like me good. In terms of Ethan's perspective. And then there's these like light casters versus dark casters, good casters versus bad casters. And it's not something that I can buy, even from a magic level, because I want to understand what makes someone dark. Because, what makes someone bad or good, right?
I feel like I agree. This is not completely explained. I feel like they touch upon it at the very end, though, which we definitely have to talk about the ending, because I had like a lot and also not a lot of feelings about it. But basically, we talked about how Lena's mom is basically Lord Voldemort, which if you haven't read Harry Potter, he's the bad guy. And so at the end of the book, there's a showdown where all this information comes out. And so we finally get the full picture of basically Lena has to... Okay, actually, let me take a step back. You continue your thought, because I just realized I have so many more thoughts that I need to get to before the one I was
We're already at like, this is so long. Okay. Yeah. Well, what I was getting into is like, what does it mean to be good or bad? And I just like, I felt like throughout the book, there was like, Ethan finds out that Lena's afraid of going dark. But we also find out that Lena doesn't really know what that means. Like, she doesn't really know because she believes that both of her parents are dead. Like, everyone lied to her about what happened with her parents. We find out what actually happened, which is that her mom killed her dad. And it's unclear if she killed her. Like, she would have already been dark, right? Like,
right. Like, she didn't have when she was 16, or that's not the implication.
Yeah.
So she would have already been dark. But she somehow, for some reason, chooses to kill Lena's dad, like 2 years after Lena was born. I think Lena's supposed to be 2 when that happens.
Yeah. But Lena doesn't know this at the beginning. And all she knows is that, like, you know, there are the light casters, which is the family that she's been with, and then there are the dark casters who aren't, like, once dark casters are turned dark, they're sent away from their light family. And so she knows that Ridley felt herself going dark, and so she left, and she hadn't seen her until she comes back, and then she automatically hates her because she's dark. But like, we don't get the sense of like what it means to be dark, and we also don't get the sense that Lena even really knows.
Right, and I don't even know. I'm confused about how Ridley would have known that she was going dark, because Lena felt a lot like she was going dark, but it was because mostly she was afraid of going dark.
Right.
Like, what does it mean?
So again, what is it? Like, is it a feeling? Is it like, is it, do you turn hateful? Like, what is that even? Because, you know, it's not like, life isn't as simple as like hate comes from somewhere, you know?
Right. I mean, that is, I think, the implication at, like I was going to say, at the end of the book, when there's the big showdown, one of the things that they say is that, like, it changes you as not the same person. But that's not that's not really an answer, you know?
Like, I feel like we need to really get into the fundamentals of like good and bad. And again, like, there's this thing about it being like an essential thing that, and Lena says something during the book that's like, oh, like, you know, humans get to choose whether they're, you know, good or bad, but like, I don't get that choice or whatever. Like, and it's like, but it's not like, you know, humans like wake up one day and are like, I'm going to be good. Or I'm going to be bad. Like, it's not that simple. And it's really, really hard for me to understand. And so there were some things towards the end that indicated that, like, and there was also something like that indicated that, like, just, and again, if there are comparisons drawn here, it's a little sticky, but the idea that, like, you know, the North and South United States were fighting against each other, and the casters were fighting their own war, and that it's a war between light and dark. And so it would almost make more sense to me if somehow it was established that light casters do a certain kind of magic and dark casters do another certain kind of magic, and they are having a war. And so when you choose, you know, to be claimed, you choose a side of that war, and it's indicated at the very end that, you know, dark casters hate mortals, which is not something we really like knew. And it seems like Macon and well, actually, he's not a light caster. He's actually something else. He's kind of more of a dark creature. We get but you know, like, but that light casters don't hate mortals, but we don't really see that demonstrated. And so, but it would make more sense to me if it was more of like that kind of thing. And so that's why, like, Lena thinks it would be bad to turn dark because she would have to leave her family, and she doesn't want to leave her family, and maybe she doesn't agree with the other side or whatever. And if there was like a disagreement kind of thing, not some kind of thing where like someone turns essentially dark. And there's a lot of interesting things. I really kind of wanted to get into like Jungian analysis, like, and talk about like the idea of like, you know, the shadow, like the idea that you have like a shadow side that, you know, is all the things that you reject, and like the idea of like actualization is to stop pushing that away, to accept it, to integrate it into yourself, and how like there's this kind of dynamic being played out of like the light versus the dark, and how, you know, there's something that's said about how like there needs to be both for some reason because of the balance, and how, you know, you could do a lot with that, and you could do a lot with like how there's the duality of like the North versus the South in the Civil War, and I think the book's trying to kind of like bring those two together, but doesn't really do it.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. And I don't have a ton to add to that because I feel like you kind of covered it. Like there is no, it basically seems like being dark means doing bad things for no rhyme or reason other than you are dark, so you're gonna do it. Like,
right. And it bothers me.
But then it's like, so why would anybody choose to go dark? Like, it doesn't make sense, because what is the benefit? Like you said, is there another power that you get to use? You know, is there another, like, is there a moral, or not a moral, but is there like a stance on something? It doesn't make sense. But so then we find out that Larkin, who is also who's also Lena's cousin, and Ridley's brother, Larkin has been pretending to be a light caster because he's a guy. He's been pretending to be a light caster, but he's actually a dark caster. So it's like, why? Why did he make that choice?
And his power is illusion. So like someone should have maybe thought of that, but
right. But what is the benefit to him to being dark? He works with the darkest, most powerful dark caster ever, but what benefit does that give him?
Right. And we get something where they talk about how, oh, Lena, come to our side. We have cookies. You won't even care about like all the things you care about now. Like you won't be like stressed out or sad, basically, because she's been like kind of like having a depressive episode this whole book. And so maybe the one time the idea that like you don't feel remorse anymore. But then again, there's like if you, because like there are people who don't feel empathy and things like that, or have low empathy, and it's not really how it works. It's not like it makes you just like do bad things. So like I don't want to like say that that's but it's just like this idea that like, oh, like come to the dark side, you won't care about like you. It's like you'll have fun. It'll be and then also when we find out that Ethan and Lena can't be together because casters and mortals like can't
be together, she means they can't have sex,
which is like okay, they can still be together. They could
definitely still be together. Like, and we alluded to this earlier, how this is not a sex heavy book. Like this is a YA romance, and they make out.
He doesn't even know that he's referencing blowjobs like half the time that he does.
And he he doesn't seem to once think about, like, he definitely is attracted to Lena, but like he doesn't talk about sex. Like that's not.
The only times it's indicated is when he's like talking about how he has to think about like, oh, I have to think about basketball stats or whatever when I'm around her.
Yeah, which implies like, thinking away an erection, but it's really just him trying to keep Lena from reading his thoughts, I think.
Right, yeah.
But it's like a stand-in for that. Anyway, you're right. But so I also think we have to stop here to talk about how the main conflict throughout the entire book is Lena doesn't have the choice to go to choose the life. She doesn't have a choice. And they're trying to find something that can break this curse and allow her to have that. Only then, on the eve of her 16th birthday, we find out that she actually does have a choice, and everything that they've been doing and all the anxiety was for nothing.
Well, because for nothing. If she actually knew the truth, it probably would have been worse.
I mean, that's fair, because the truth of the matter was that so it's a phenomenon for someone to be super, super powerful, have like more than one power, basically, which is what Lena has. She can do a ton of different things and control like the elements, whereas the rest of her family, like Ridley's a siren, Larkin is a shapeshifter, her grandma's an empath, so she can like temporarily use the powers of another caster. They all have
the most interesting one. Aunt Dell is a palimpsest, which means that she can see multiple periods of time all at once, and that I think is fascinating and underutilized
as hell. And I feel bad for
her. Like that's like, wild to live that way and like live.
Let's have a book of that. But so basically, Lena's got like the ultimate power, but it's not the first time that it happened. Her mother also had this power, and she became a cataclysm, which is the dark version of this powerful person. And apparently, this wasn't in any of the books that they looked in, but for some reason, Macon and people knew this already and didn't tell Lena. But apparently, the first person with these powers is set to become a cataclysm. But then the second person born with these powers can choose. She can break the cycle. And so Lena is that person, and so she's got the choice.
But if she chooses to go light, well, yeah, all the dark casters in her family die. And if she chooses to go dark, all the light casters in her family die. Wait, yes.
Yeah. So basically she's, regardless of whether or not they're all bad, like, she's gonna kill half of her family with her choice regardless.
And now you might say, well, you know, in this book where it seems like it's very black and white, and she seems to hate Ridley now, like, Ridley might be the one that's, like, the hardest for her, but ultimately she doesn't know her mom. No one knew that Larkin was dark. So if she did ultimately make that choice, I mean, like, would she care? I mean, would she struggle morally with making? Right. Really get the chance to know if she would, because the main thing is that Macon is technically also a dark.
So he would also die. So it's a struggle for her. It's a struggle for her to make that choice specifically because of Macon, and a little bit, I think, because of Ridley. Unclear how she would have felt about Larkin, and she pretty much hates her mom, so I think she might have been cool with it. Yeah. But one of the funniest parts of the book to me was when she's being told that her mom is called Seraphine or Seraphina, and she's the most powerful dark caster, and she goes, "That's not true. My mom's name is Sarah." And I'm like, yeah, I think you could make the leap here that, like, maybe Sarah's short for Seraphine. Like, I cracked up. I
remember that part.
But anyway, so how does this end? How does Lena get around it? Well, this happens at midnight, and the moon's got to be full or something, or the moon's got to be out in the sky. The moon is out, and it's got something to do with the moon, and I don't remember exactly what it was. But basically, Lena blocks out the moon, and therefore does not have to make a choice.
Yeah.
Which, what a loophole. Using your powers to block the moon, so that way you don't have to kill half the people in your family.
Which I think was actually an interesting resolution. I kind of almost wish that this, like, killing the family thing didn't come out of left field at the very end.
I wish the choice thing didn't come out of left field at the very end. Yeah. Like, we learned all of this, so I felt that the ending was rushed and almost anticlimactic for all of the things that were happening, which is, like, all these revelations about the things that they've been looking into, and Lena's family and the powers, and then also the reveal of Seraphine as who's been masquerading as Link's mom, and now is out here and, like, doing her caster abilities, and then the revelation that Larkin is actually a dark caster this whole time.
I will say, I wish we got to see Larkin as a character, because
that was a twist. That was a twist. I forgot about that the first time.
The only time he started to seem like a character was literally right before he was revealed to be evil, because
it
was a whole thing where it was Lena's birthday, and then Ethan was there at the house with her, and Link showed up with Ridley, and Ridley had enchanted the whole high school to come throw her a party on Macon's lawn.
Being to her for the first time in the entire book. It was actually cool.
It was just, I was like, that's kind of cool of you, Ridley. Because, you know, they all were, like, as much as we complained about the fact that they were all one-dimensional, like, they were, like, I mean, they were one-dimensional, and that was a writing weakness, I would say, but we didn't feel for them. Like, sure, make them be nice to Lena. Yeah. So then Larkin is trying to persuade Macon to let Lena go have fun at the party. And I was
Which is a little
character.
Yeah, it's surprising.
Yeah, you're like, oh, Larkin cares about his cousin.
Yeah, but, like, also he's cool with Ridley. Like, I guess they did used to be brother and sister, or they are brother and sister. Then, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Turns out he's bad.
Yeah.
Which was a great reveal, but it just happened at the same time as all of the other big reveals.
And again, we didn't get to see Larkin really be a character before that.
No. So
I would have been into Larkin as much as I was into Ridley.
If you knew that he was bad, or just was more.
It got to be a character.
Yeah.
Because
I would have been interesting to see.
Look, the dark casters that we know of Macon and Ridley are, like, the most interesting. Let's just not.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, Macon's not a dark caster, but he's just a dark creature.
The dark ones.
Are more. So let's summarize the ending a little bit here. So besides all those revelations that happened, it's also like a power struggle literally between Lena and her mom, and they're like casting, and there's fire and a battle, and Macon's brother Hunting, again, I think I mentioned him earlier, shows up, and he's a legit vampire, and he and Macon fight.
And we barely got a reference to his brother throughout the book, so it's kind of weird that he just showed up.
Yeah, and it was like very random, and he was scary, but okay. And then, so we also talked about how for some reason Ethan and Lena have this link in there that allows them to talk to each other in their brains, and that is not explained unless I missed something. Still unclear why they have that. Like, he's just a special mortal that has like,
there's indications, that he's special, that he has some like, power, and Emma and Macon don't know what it is, and they don't really get it, and we don't get resolution. So it comes in the next book, or
but so
books.
Once this battle is happening, like, Lena does warn Ethan, like, she can hear everything you're saying, she being her mother, Seraphine. So Ethan at one point hears Lena's voice in his head, like, saying, "Hey, I'm up wherever, like, come find me." And so he goes, and it turns out it's Seraphine, who for some reason stabs him. And
she stabs him because she wants Lena to go dark, and she's like,
no, but I don't understand why she stabbed him, because she's a dark caster.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Like, she's got all this crazy power, and she's like, let me just use a knife.
And it's funny when you think about what actually happens in the movie.
I don't remember what happens in the movie.
I do.
Let's save that I want to save that for our companion podcast, where we will watch this movie and we will dissect it in relation to this book.
In a different What I remember of the movie, I remember the movie better than the book.
I don't remember the movie at all, and I realize I barely remember the book too. But so Seraphine stabs Ethan. Again, don't know why she chose stabbing, but she's like Juliana said, she wanted Lena to go dark because it would make her upset, and
being upset means darkness, I guess.
I don't know. And so Lena asks Emma to help her find the Book of Moons, again, very parallel to Genevieve, Ivy, Ethan of old. And so Lena finds the spell that Genevieve used, and even though Genevieve was unsuccessful, she successfully uses it on Ethan and brings Ethan back to life, but then Macon dies. And I was so pissed. I forgot that he died. I was so upset.
And it was weird,
so unhappy.
They literally switched places. Like, Macon appears where Ethan was, and Ethan appears where Macon was. Because Macon was down to the count. He had been attacked by his brother.
But he was like, he wasn't dead. He was just...
Yeah. So, and they don't tell Ethan.
Yeah, and so Ethan wakes up, and he's like,
we should say how we know this, because there's like a handful where it suddenly is from Lena's perspective when Ethan's stabbed.
Yeah. So that's the one time we get it from her perspective.
Yeah.
And I don't have a ton to say about that. Like, it wasn't enough for me to like.
It wasn't about her character. It was funny. It was about Ethan.
Yeah.
So it was kind of more.
But yeah, so Ethan dies, is brought back to life. They don't tell him what happened. He just knows, like, oh, I lived, and also Macon died. So sad. Apparently he succumbed to his wounds from hunting. Like, yeah, bummer. And then, like, he walks home from Ravenwood, which they've been driving back and forth from. And I'm like, that's got to be a really long walk. And then that's it. Like, the book ends.
And it ends with, okay, so we didn't talk about, like, the 16 Moons song.
Oh, God, there's so much, honestly, that we could talk about. I think one of the good things about this book is, like, there's a lot. There's a lot. There's a ton of ground.
There's a song that, so part of the dream that Ethan has in the beginning, like, after Taylor mentioned that there was a song, but we didn't read any parts of it, but
I don't even remember song
up at random points throughout the story where, like, they report hearing this music, and I don't know if we ever really know where it's coming from.
No,
but
we don't.
The first time it appears, the lyrics kind of change a bit sometimes, but not that much. But it's 16 moons, 16 years, 16 of your deepest fears, 16 times you dreamed my tears, falling through the years. And then
a couple more verses.
And actually, brief interlude to mention that before, all the stuff goes down at the very end, Lena does get to enjoy the party a little bit, and Link. So Ridley, gets Link a whole stage. He met some guys in New York who became part of his band
on that New York trip that Ethan didn't ask about, so we have no idea what happened. But okay.
And I think he ends up singing the 16 Moon song, and we don't even know how he knows it. Or maybe we do at that point, but Ethan and Lena are just they're playing our song because they've just heard it so many times throughout the book.
Right. And it's super weird because the way that Link explains it is that song that you referenced, it just came to me. Yeah.
And they're just at that point, they're just oh, we don't know where it came from, but it's fine.
Yeah.
But I loved it because it was so funny because he I love Link. And then he plays a song that Lena wrote for him because we know she's a writer. Yeah, it was really cute.
Link asked her to write a song for him, and she did.
Yeah, and there's an implication that Ridley is kind of partially doing all this for Link, and there's there's also a scene where Ridley almost goes completely off the deep end. I mean, Link learns what she is.
Link and Lena. This is not a bad thing. Okay, the bad part of it is that she's controlling the townspeople and making them nice, but she's doing it.
So the bad thing,
no, I guess it was a distraction.
Yeah. So the bad thing that she does is it's a distraction for Seraphine. She's working with Seraphine, but then also she kidnaps Ethan's dad, and almost kills him. And but then there's a scene where she then, Link shows up with Ethan to stop her. Link doesn't even know what's going on, but he sees this and he starts to understand that she's some kind of, witch or whatever. And he's trying to talk to her. He says something to her that we don't hear because we're from Ethan's perspective, and she throws her lollipop, which is what she uses to control people, and she runs away because she's I gotta get out of here. Seraphine's gonna come after me. And Link is see, you're not all bad or whatever, and there's this look, okay, problematic because she's been controlling him most of the time. Yes, but here's the thing: a relationship in a book doesn't have to be morally good in every way for me to just find it more interesting, and I just find it more interesting than whatever Lena and Ethan have going on. But anyway, what was I saying? So the 16 Moon song. But anyway, so he sings it at the concert. He also sings the song that Lena wrote. It's really cute. And I brought this up because at the end of the book,
that's right,
Lena has delayed her claiming. She's not been claimed. The end of the book, we get new lyrics. 17 moons, 17 years. Eyes where dark or light appears. Gold for yes and green for no. 17, the last to know. What does it mean? We don't really know.
We don't really know. My thought is it delayed the choice a year. I don't remember. Don't tell me because I genuinely don't remember what happened in the rest of the books. I have a vague recollection. But that seems to maybe be the implication. Something's gonna go down in the 17th year. The other thing was, and this Ethan was so nonchalant about it. He was and now he's alive again, but he doesn't know it's again. He thinks he's just still alive, and he is hanging out with Lena after all this happens, and he looks over at her and he's oh, I never noticed. One of her eyes is green and one of her eyes is hazel. Oh no, more yellow. And it's a trait of the dark casters to have yellow eyes and the light casters to have green eyes. And I'm okay, so what is this transition? Is it really just barely hazel? But even so, there's parts in the book where he literally is driving on a
oh yeah.
I can't. It was too much. So he was driving at the beginning of the book, and he is just meeting Lena basically for the first time. He's driving. It's pouring rain. It's super dark, and in the darkness on the road, he sees two green eyes.
I'm assuming it's eye shine. It's when you shine a flashlight in the eyes of a dog.
I mean, I guess so, but he just described her eyes as really big and green, and it's kind of ludicrous, how big and green, especially in that moment. I think it actually had to do with because she's casting, and I think her eyes get brighter when she's casting. And she was making the storm happen, whether she meant to or not.
Oh, yeah. Also, her hair waves,
and her hair waves, which is
when she was casting. Which you think that people notice that?
That's what I was gonna say. It's how do people not notice this? But anyway, So the fact that like he's described her eyes like many, many times as so green, and then so nonchalantly is like, oh, one of them is actually kind of yellow. It's like what? So anyway, that's like kind of why I feel the ending was so, even though so much stuff happened at the end, the ending was anticlimactic because like Ethan's like, oh, bummer, Macon died. Oh, my girlfriend has one yellow eye now. That's strange. Like, oh, here's a new version of the song. Oh, okay. I'm like, so much happened here.
Dude, you aren't you like, I would think that he might be thinking like about like, gee, what does this mean? You know, what does it mean that Lena wasn't claimed? Like, what does it mean? What's going on?
But also like, even if he was dead for some of it, like it's a big freaking deal when the thing that they were all afraid of happening, you know, didn't happen, and Lena was able to circumvent it. And like, we just get Ethan walking home, casually noticing her eyes. Like, I don't know. It's just,
it's just like tonally kind of weird.
Yeah, it was a weird tone. And like also Ethan, the question guy, he's got no questions.
Right. And that's where like the inconsistencies come in. And I think that's what makes it harder for us to engage with him sometimes as a character, outside of the scenes where we found that like we got more of him. And that, I think it's just like a struggle between the fact that he's the point of view character, but it's telling a story that's not really centered around him at the end of the day. Ultimately. And that's where I think dual perspectives could have come in.
Yeah.
Really well. And given, you know, him more rounding out in ways that like we don't get from his perspective. And I don't want to be like blanket, I'm not a big fan of first person perspective, because there are some books that are like my favorite books of the time that are in first person perspective. But it is, I think, one of the limitations of it that like I feel like when you're gonna use it, you gotta be really conscious of the story that you're telling.
And in this kind of story, like I mean, again, we got so much. Like, this is a kind of long book for a YA novel, but it's all
more I could have said probably about a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we get out of this book, but just imagine how the story could have gone if it was from multiple perspectives and we got to see so much more. Like we as the readers know what's going on instead of just being completely confused with Ethan. Like they could have been really cool too to like have that knowledge as we're seeing them learn all this. Like that might have been helpful.
So I feel like
I guess we can wrap it up.
This is really a good place to wrap it up because we talked a lot.
I guess any final thoughts?
You know, to sum up, basically, struggles with a lot of issues that are pretty common, I think, of the genre of the era, but not necessarily making excuses for those problems, particularly just the whole question of a book set in the South centered around the Civil War that doesn't really get into racism or slavery. It's just anything that really centers around American history at this point. Just a very distracting element of the book, at the least, but really kind of something that I just don't think stands
the test of time.
Yeah, at all. And definitely, you know, and if you want a book actually that is a young adult fantasy novel, but actually like contends with history of that nature, like, and racism and institutional racism and things like that. Legendborn by Tracy Dion, I think, is the author. Was one that it came out actually just a couple years ago. I read it. It was a lot of fun. It was a debut novel, and I could definitely feel that in some of like the elements of the pacing and plotting, but overall really enjoyed it. And it's, you know, it's written by a Black author. The protagonist is Black, and you know she's going to a pre-college program and contending with, you know, the history of a mostly almost entirely white, like kind of underground society.
Oh, okay.
And you know, her own roots in that, and it does not turn away from the history that's built into kind of that kind of society and that and the United States as a whole, and it really does it opens up a lot of, I think, more interesting conversations around that, where, you know, I'm sure you could have conversations about how the author chooses to portray those things, but that's digging in a lot deeper than like whatever we would get from this story, obviously. So that's one. I thought of it because it's one that really does contend with that and still is also like a young adult fantasy at heart. So,
yeah,
maybe check that out. But
that was going to be one of the things I said was like, I think it can be done. Like you don't have to not talk about racism and American history and the implications and ramifications of everything in a young adult fantasy novel. Like you can definitely do it. And I would argue like you should do it because I don't know if it is helpful to skirt around the realities of things.
No, it really never is. Because the only way that you can
understand and learn from something is to know what it is.
Right. And I think that's a big element too of this book, that it's funny. I don't know if it intended to be kind of, but a lot of the things that the characters are powerless over, they're powerless over because they don't know it, because people around them won't acknowledge truth, for better or worse. And like, that's the thing, is like, you can't really ignore the past when it is directly impacting the present, right? Like you can't let go of the past. You can't just be like, oh, that happened so long ago, we're not going to talk about it, when it's like so entrenched in the present, because then, without acknowledging it, you can't change anything. That's really, it feels like that's something that just really went unacknowledged here.
I agree.
Aside from that, the story had a lot going on.
Which kind of makes it, it makes it definitely really fun to discuss anything. Like it's fun to talk about it because there is so much going on. And that made it kind of fun to read too, because aside from the obvious that we've already discussed, there were fun parts. Like there were interesting, funny, poignant parts. And so, picking those out and was enjoyable and entertaining, and then laughing at some of Ethanisms is also kind of enjoyable. So
yeah, and it's definitely interesting to see how you think differently about things when you are coming at it from just years later, and from a different perspective in terms of where the world is at, from a different perspective in terms of where you're at internally.
Education, like, different levels of education.
Yeah.
Not being a kid. That's a big one. But yeah, so I guess listeners, hopefully you enjoyed hearing our conversation about this. Let us know in whatever, I don't know how this is going to work, but let us know if you've read this book, what your thoughts are, if you're going to read it again just to see, or if you haven't read it and you're going to read it now, let us know. I'm interested because this is an open dialogue, and
kind of a doozy for a first episode.
Yeah, we really picked an intense, meaty book.
And for the next one, we don't know what we're going to be reading.
Yeah, but it will be another young adult novel that we've read in the past, probably.
Well, I hope everyone has a great day, week, month, year, life.
Weekend, evening, morning, lunch. Thank you for listening, and let us know how you enjoyed it.
Hope you got through all of it, because I have a feeling.
Yeah. Oh, if you got through this entire video, let us know. Code word is
entire video. It's just audio.
Oh yeah, this entire video. Okay, if you got through,
they're on video, so
yeah. If you got through this entire podcast up to this point, let us know. The code word is Ethan, I hate Gatlin, wait. I hate Gatlin in quotations as his nickname in the middle of his name. So that's how we'll know if you got through the whole thing. All right. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
Bye.